The story begins with a pleasant wind blowing into the room. By this time, the main character wakes up, fully clothed. Suddenly, he was very surprised by what he saw. He looked out the window and saw a familiar view, and it made him break out in a sweat because he was in a game that he had just been playing. It is narrated that 3 years ago, the main character took possession of the body of a character from the game, which is called Heroic Legends of Arkan. And we see that a girl is using a staff to summon a huge red ball, and next to her was a huge man with the face of a dog. The plot of this game told about various dangerous events and endless incidents in the academy. And in conclusion, so the end of the world came in general, and it was an incredibly large-scale story. But our guy was happy, because all these problems will be solved by the main character of the game. And he is just a minor character, an ordinary NPC from a beginner's quest, in which the main character saves a villager. Wandering around the world, he noticed that everything is so realistic that it is indistinguishable from life. And he knew that as long as the story of this world repeated the plot of the game, everything would be fine. Then, after taking a walk, he decided to take a look at Park Si-hoo, the game's soon-to-be rich and famous protagonist. He was walking around the world, trying to find a spawn point, and then he noticed Puck sitting there muttering to himself, "Sweet potato. No, a sprite." The hero was surprised by his words, because in this world there was definitely not what Puck wanted. When suddenly he stood up and shouted that he would live effectively, only for his own sake. Immediately, the hero grabs his hand and replies that he is too. Puck was very surprised by this, but it turns out that Park Si-hoo was exactly the same person who got into this game. Puck was the main character, so he had a powerful weapon that he could use to kill the dragon. And the difference between our guy and the pack is the privilege of the game character, the statistics window. Park Si-hoo himself didn't know what to do with it, because he had never been through this game. But our hero understood that he could replace the problem of not knowing the game. He started telling Puck that if he wanted to become a mage, he needed to improve his intelligence. And then he should have a skill book, which is quite important. The hero passed all the parts, in all possible ways. He can safely be called a real professional in the Heroic Legends of Arkan. He knew that it was an incredible advantage to get such a person to help him. Suddenly, he didn't notice that there was already a huge dog behind him that was trying to attack him. But when he noticed, he was saved by Puck, who killed his opponent. And then Puck asked if his friend was okay. Of course, our hero was not so weak. He can also fight with enemies, and he also has full information about this game. And together they had knowledge and experience with the system. Our hero jumps and prepares a spear strike. After being struck, the spear pierces the monster. He thought that they made a great duo, because he believed that together with Puck, they would save many lives and prevent the end of the world, as well as be able to return to Earth. Puck handed the elixir to his friend, and the hero was very surprised where he could get such a good elixir with his class. He drinks the elixir and wonders if the only disappointing thing about all of this was the men around him. And all the charm of this game was in the genre, fantasy action, as well as in a variety of heroines and dating simulator. Park and his team are standing next to each other and discussing something, but Park Si-hoo preferred not to get involved with girls, inviting them to join the team only when necessary, so at some point, only men remained in their group. The hero was not happy, and so he wondered why their team should consist only of men. We see a woman's hand trying to reach for the katana, and even at that moment, the hero should have realized everything, because on the way to the entrance ceremony, the granddaughter of the Sword Emperor died. The other girl was lying on the bed. Her name was Maria. She was the final boss of the first stage and just disappeared without a trace. Then we see footage of mysterious murders and disappearances. It all looked pretty terrible, and the story of the game itself moved away from the original plot of the game. These images began to be sucked into the black hole. Park looked at him with disdain, and the hero was interested in Si-hoo's reaction to all this. Immediately, Puck turned around and looked like nothing was happening. The hero should have noticed his real identity. Our guy looked happy because he trusted his friend, but he should have doubted his close friend at least a little. Suddenly, the hero was horrified and surprised by what he saw. After all, Maria Dunnerf is one of the heroines of the game, but she and Puck couldn't meet her because she disappeared. He saw the rod of Mary that was in the flask. This made him wonder where the rod came from. He was very scared and immediately began to doubt his friend as he decided to follow Puck, who constantly went out in the middle of the night. He trusted it so much that he couldn't even think of a place like this underground. It was a huge hangar which contained about 100 of these flasks, and apparently it was his inventory. The katana that someone was reaching for was also in the flask. This sword disappeared along with another heroine, Arisha. These weren't the only items, as Jaeger's mace and Lark's spellbook were also there. All of these items belonged to the heroes who disappeared as the game progressed. When suddenly the hero saw something that finally broke faith in his friend, there were legs tied with chains. In this hangar was the body of a girl who was chained up in a flask. The liquid she was floating in was red in color, and it was the same Maria Dunner. The hero did not expect to see his former friend in this hangar. Puck wasn't happy to see him there either, so he asked what the hero was doing there. Our boyfriend was incredibly angry at his former friend, so he started yelling, asking what was all this doing in such a place, because Puck told us that he went after Maria, but missed her. Zai, who responded very coolly, saying that she was still a demon. He thought vampire blood was worth it. The machine that Maria was in was connected to a pipe that was still dripping with her blood, and Crazy Puck replied that he had only found an effective use for the demon. The hero was shocked by what he heard, and Park then told him that he also tasted this blood. He remembered that he had been drinking that high-ranked elixir. The hero immediately felt like throwing up after that. Puck looked at his friend with calm eyes, asking what was the big deal, because he had worked so hard to catch her, and noticed that he had been trapped in the woods for a whole month. Our guy was very angry, because he felt a very big betrayal, so I started asking him why he did this. Puck looked too cold. He replied that he was doing it for the sake of effective progress in the story, because his friend tired him out with the way of passing. The hero was sitting on the floor, leaning on the camera with Maria. And Puck went on to say that from constantly saving people, they have only losses, and besides, he does not kill enemies like Jaeger and Lark, but simply continues to save those who cannot even be manipulated without increasing the level of friendship. Puck's eyes were blank, and he said that using people this way was much more effective, and then added that he would be better at this game than his friend. The hero was very upset, because his close friend lied from the very beginning. He is by no means a novice, so he asked how many people he had already killed. Park thought about it, and decided to look at his stats, which were reflected in his eyes, and began to pull the drama, saying that he needed to think about it. And then, with a terrifying look, he said that if he killed 3 more people, it would be 100,000. The hero was already gritting his teeth in anger, and he realized that this was not even a person. So he got up and grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, and then immediately started yelling at him that he was a monster. And Puck just replied to calm him down, because he also killed ordinary NPCs. The hero continued shaking him and shouting, and then saying that those he killed were just ordinary villains who could not be saved. They all wanted to destroy the world. His anger couldn't be quieted, so he asked that Park was tired from passing, and decided to pass effectively. Then suddenly his anger got the better of him, and he just pushed Puck and said that if he was obsessed with efficiency, then why would he take Odachi, and why would he even need a hidden fragment for knights? Before Puck could say anything, the hero interrupted him again, asking why he couldn't just make do with the usual elixir. While Puck was pinned by the hero to the phone, Maria was in the background, and the hero kept yelling at him that he could easily make elixirs through the system, so why would he suffer from inefficient work like this farm? Puck just smiled, and then said that he was so weird. A murderous anger could be seen in his eyes. This really wasn't a human anymore. He said that the hero decided to find a punching bag to amuse his sociopathy, when suddenly Pac grabbed the hero by the scruff of the neck and threw with all his strength right into the device. The hero was hit so hard that he just bled from the head, and he almost lost consciousness, all because he annoyed Puck. The hero was not weak, and even such a blow could not knock him out. His ex-friend went on to say that after all that he had done for him, he shouldn't talk to him like that, because he only thinks about him. Puck was starting to go crazy, and he looked crazy. Then he started shouting that he should be the hero's whole world. He thinks that he doesn't know his place and meddles in other people's affairs, and then gets hurt, and all he does is look at the girls. His eyes were filled with madness, and he said that he wouldn't hold back anymore. The hero was simply horrified, and very much puzzled, because he did not expect to hear such a thing from him. So he started waving his hands and shouting that he wasn't that kind of character, because they had been together for about 200 chapters, so why did he change everything so abruptly? These words didn't calm Puck down in the slightest, and a scary aura even formed around him. Approaching the hero, he said that he got rid of everything that could block the way, for his sake, for his own sake, for the sake of their future. The hero guessed everything, and shouted that this is why there are only men in the team. His former friend replied that all these men were needed just to stare at them, and he really loves him alone. After these words, our guy immediately hit him, and then, while his friend recovered from the blow, he thought that he was very intimidating, and he was terribly scared, because he hadn't even had a girlfriend before. The hero tries to run away from him, but he does not have time to run far, because some magic grabs him by the leg. And then instantly she grabs his body, not letting him escape. They also squeezed him hard, which was already painful. He started screaming and begging for mercy. Puck just stood there and said that he couldn't escape, because he was going to lock him up forever. The hero was very scared, and his former friend looked crazy. He was chained up, unable to move, and Puck kept saying over and over that he was the only real person in this fake world. Therefore, the hero began to scream out of fear, saying that he was very afraid of him. And Puck went to the portal, saying that it would all be over soon because he only had one fight left, and they would be together forever. After a while, the hero was lying in an unknown place, wondering what Park Si-hoo was up to. He was notified that the final stage was being launched. He was lying there in despair, and he knew that this was where it all started, and even more so, Puck always killed alone, so he would win the boss. He looked very tired and empty, because he knew that there would be a curse right after the boss fight, and he couldn't imagine what would happen to him. When suddenly, he was notified that the player was dead and the test was failed. The hero lay as if on the waves, and did not even know what to say. And I thought that he just went and lost to the boss. And immediately we are transported to the very beginning, where a warm breeze was blowing in his room. And he wakes up in utter fear. Getting out of bed, he saw the same landscape again and realized that he was back 3 years ago when he first appeared in this game. He looked at his hands and immediately clenched them into fists in anger because he knew that he would have to kill Park Si-hoo. He started to cry and looked very nervous as he would have to kill the player. We are shown an incident with a river in which a dam broke during a task to subdue water monsters, and the river took an entire village with it. Countless monsters and people drowned, and Park Si-hoo just laughed at the horrifying scene. He shouted that it was amazing. The hero was not only scared by this picture, but also scared of his own friend. And then he couldn't understand why Park laughed so much, but he began to think about it now. There was a huge amount of exp to be seen in the river, and Puck and Hero stood and watched. The hero realized that in the countless deaths, Puck only saw an opportunity to monopolize the experience. He remembered the horrifying look on Park's face when he said that if he killed 3 more people, there would be 100,000 deaths. So he immediately started running towards him, because he can stop Puck now, as long as he's a regular rank 5 rookie. Puck is standing at the gate to Merkab, and the hero knew that all possible power-ups for players are concentrated in the Merkab Academy. And after entering there, Zai-hoo became much stronger. He looked with creepy eyes. And the hero continued to run. He flew at full speed, since Puck is not a monster yet, but no one knows how fast his power will grow, because the admission ceremony will take place in 5 days. Suddenly, our hero notices yellow mushrooms, and running past them grabs them with him. He immediately came up with a plan while looking at them, and believed that the only way to kill Park Si-hoo was to act right now. We are transported to a dark forest where a training quest was held. A carriage traveling to the city of Merkaba broke down in the middle of a forest teeming with monsters. The girl is standing next to the guy who apparently killed the last monster, and she tells Puck that he's pretty strong. Puck pretended to be embarrassed and thanked her for her words. By that time, a man holding a flashlight calls out to everyone, saying that they have finished fixing the carriage. The boy and girl's names were Leon and Laura. Laura stretches and wants to take a quick nap, and Leon happily goes and says that then they should go on the road. Suddenly they hear a scream and start looking in the direction of the sound in a frightened way. A huge log was flying straight at them. Leon decided to save Laura and pushes her away, shouting that she should take care of herself. The log flew very close to Leon, as if it would hit him just a little more. Immediately they took up their swords, and Leon called out to Laura, who said she recognized the sound. It was a huge Beowulf, a monster of the 2nd rank, and it looked very intimidating. He sat up on his paws and began to growl furiously. The hero was standing in the bushes and heard all this, but was surprised that it all started so quickly, because he immediately ran there, but did not have time to stop. He needed some time to prepare. Suddenly, the monster attacks Laura and kills her with one blow. Then he growls again, and Leon notices that his girlfriend has been killed. The hero believes that he was close to save them. Leon yells at Puck to get into the carriage faster, as he wants to buy some time. Puck shouted to the groom to leave, and they would catch up with them later. By that time, a girl came running to help them, and standing behind a tree, she called Puck, but he replied that he could not leave Leon. She told him to run, because when Puck turned to face the monster, Leon was already caught by the throat. Park Si-hoo looked a little scared as he stood in front of the monster. The hero watched this fight, and understood that before he acted, he should make sure whether this is the hero, Park Si-hoo, who will save the world, or whether he is the same Papadanets as our guy. The monster looked very big compared to Puck. But Zai-hoo decided not to give up, and holding the sword in his hands, said that the monster is unrealistically huge. Beowulf continued to growl at them, when suddenly the same girl flew out from behind the tree, swinging her katana, and told Puck to. Then I hit the monster hard, but it just blocked it. She was very surprised, because the monster was able to block such a blow. The girl stepped in front of Puck, trying to protect him by telling him to step back as she dealt with Beowulf. Puck just stood there, silent, like he was up to something. She was already in a crouch, preparing for a strong attack, and this was the second daughter of the Arden family, the owner of Odachi, one of the 6 royal swords. She was the most important member of the squad and a famous hero. Her name was Arisha Arden. But suddenly, Puck started pulling out a dagger, which Arisha noticed. He said that he was already afraid that he would miss the moment. And right after that, he slapped Arisha on the back. She was scared. The hero also saw this and was confused, but then realized that it was the same Park Si-hoo. There was anger on his face. Arisha almost cried because she felt so betrayed by him and asked why he did it. Immediately after the impact, she began to hallucinate and everything swam in her eyes. Puck's silhouette blurred and he smiled and said that his hand just shook. While all this was happening, the monster did not sit idle and again made itself felt. Arisha heard him and he immediately attacked her, but she blocked all the blows. And the hero understood that if she died now, then Puck would get Odachi, and then he could join the squad of Lunia Arden, the great swordswoman. He stood there and watched her fight the monster to the death, and he wondered if she might have been poisoned by the poison. But she didn't die that fast. Maybe it was because she wasn't an ordinary NPC. Arisha decided to retreat, so she immediately jumped away from Beowulf. It was obvious that she was afraid of dying, so she forced herself to calm down, closed her eyes, and began to concentrate on her breathing, when suddenly she opens her eyes abruptly, and her perfect maneuvering skill is awakened. She was covered in a blue aura, and she looked like she was about to defeat everyone. Beowulf was standing right in front of her, and she was preparing to attack. But then again, Puck, with his glassy gaze, says that at this rate, she can handle the werewolf alone, and he can't let that happen. So he takes this dagger and prepares to throw it, and then throws it at the most inopportune moment for Arisha. She notices this, and simply swats the dagger away, saying that the last time was not just an accident. She was still hallucinating. Therefore, she didn't have time to react, and the monster got close to her, but Arisha managed to draw her katana and hit it. The blood from the massacre was everywhere, and Arisha simply fell to the ground out of impotence, with the defeated monster lying on top of her. Puck came up to her and started pulling out the monster's sword, and she asked why he did it. But Puck didn't even hear her, and while holding the sword in his hands, he shouted that it was a success and he was able to get Odachi. He was talking to himself while looking at the sword and saying that the sword can only be used if you have a certain skill, but he decided that he would think about it later. Then, as he turned away from her, he remembered and turned to Arisha, and then asked that killing NPCs also gives experience. When he reached the half-dead Arisha, he raised his sword, and she lay on the ground crying in despair. But Puck was so terrible that he didn't feel any regret. And then a bag of pollen flew into his face, and it was sprayed, and he was covered in it. Puck's eyes searched for where it came from, and he didn't know what it was. Puck was very scared and started yelling at whoever did this to come out and show his face. But after that, a new crowd of monsters immediately attacked him, because these very mushrooms are a favorite dish of forest monsters. The name of the mushrooms is Topan, and the same red pollen covers them completely. Puck was very angry about this. But now, in the eyes of the forest dwellers, Park Si-hoo looks like a delicious fresh meat marinated in his favorite seasoning. He began to fight off the monsters, shouting for them to leave. And while Puck fought back, the hero began to save Arisha, and was very glad that she was still alive. But then he realized that he would need to get some weapons, and he remembered about the monster. Walking up to it, he pulled out a dagger and pulled out its fang. When suddenly, words of indignation were uttered behind his back, it scared the hero. And Puck went up to him and asked him who he was. The hero knew that there was going to be a fight, so he took sand in his hand and asked Puck that he could kill 3 horned rats in a minute, because it's great to have a sword like Odachi. Puck was a little startled and asked if he was Kareen Locke. The hero was standing sideways to him, preparing to attack. Park was surprised to see him there, so he asked how he got here. The hero thought that this madman did not remember anything, and thought that this was just to his advantage. He told him haughtily that if he held the sword like that, he might lose an arm. Puck was puzzled by these words, so he looked at his sword with a blank expression. And the hero took advantage of his confusion, so he swung his hand and threw sand directly into his eyes. Puck started screaming in pain and telling him to die. But since he couldn't see anything, he just waved his sword thoughtlessly. And the hero dodged the blows, but realized that although he was a mediocre swordsman, but he moves very quickly. After all, Park Si-hoo is still stronger than him. He once again dodged the blow, and decided that he needed to give it his all. So he lunged at him with a fang and almost killed Puck, but Puck saw his movements and dodged. The hero decided to attack with lightning speed, because Puck could smell the approaching death from the fang in his neck. Puck simply defended himself with his sword out of fear, and our guy continued the onslaught. He'd figured out how to beat it, and so he'd forced it to concentrate on the fang. And Puck successfully followed his plan, trying to keep an eye on Fang. but his punches were getting closer and closer to him. So at some point, Puck was able to block another blow, but he didn't expect the hero to have any more in store this time. Puck was pretty tired from a series of quick attacks. Therefore, at the same time, the hero swung his dagger and struck him directly on the shoulder. Puck started to squeal in pain and even started to cry. And the hero decided to save the world from such a madman. So he took a fang and hit him right in the neck, but Puck was able to block this blow by offering his palm. At the same time, the hero began to press his entire body on his arm, so it couldn't save Puck, and he lost. The hero said that this is his gratitude for his past life, and he has to admit that he became much stronger thanks to Puck, but even so, he doesn't regret anything. Korin still holds the fang directly over Puck's body, and then calmly exhales, saying that he was able to nip the monster in the bud right now. Suddenly, everything started to break, and he saw an error, and then a warning that the player was dead. The analysis of Korin's card began, and all the experience of the previous player was passed on to him. Now the additional player has started his journey. Korin received the rank of AA Class Knight, successor of the Master of Martial Arts. Korin was standing there reading this message, and he was very surprised and glad that he saw this message. And also because of this message, he began to believe that he would be able to get the system and the ability window. Then he came to his senses and decided to look around. Arisha Arden was lying on the ground covered in blood, one hand resting on a bleeding wound on her right side, and the other hand was lying on the ground. Kareen Locke looked at her nervously from behind, sweat running down his face. He picked up Arisha. Korin was holding her shoulder and wiping the tears from Arisha's face, still looking at her with a worried expression. Arisha said she couldn't see at all, and Korin said at least she could talk. Korin asked if Arisha was dizzy, if her ears were ringing, and if she probably couldn't smell anything. He continued to hold her, and Arisha didn't understand how he knew all this. Judging by Arisha's slurring of the tongue, the poison of the peacock frog was involved. And during training, it is difficult to create this poison without using various combinations. If Zaihu's combination skill was slightly higher, Arisha would have died instantly. A bloody fang was stuck into Arisha and her clothes were very dirty. Arisha was still in danger because the fang was still in her body. Kareen unbuckled his belt to stop the bleeding and give him an antidote. Arisha screamed in pain as the belt tightened on her arm. Kareen soothed her, telling her that he was good at stopping the bleeding and removing the poison. With a worried look in his eyes, he decided to give her something in the teeth. It would be bad if Arisha bit her tongue. Then he saw an opportunity to let Sihu's hand be bitten. He jumped at the chance and told Arisha to bite her hand, because it would be very painful and she would have to clench her teeth with all her might and endure. Kareen Locke took off his shirt, still looking at Arisha. Korin went back in time and didn't understand why, but this time the player died at Korin's hands. With a sharp movement, he pulled the fang out of her body, holding her by the waist and the shirt on her arm. Arisha was still alive. Korin was crouched beside Arisha, who was unconscious, and he had saved her. Sticks were used to make supports that held an iron rod with a pot over a fire in which something white was being cooked. Korin was preparing an antidote, glancing over his shoulder at Arisha. Arisha didn't have to worry, because according to Korin, people don't just die. Arisha started to come to her senses and started saying, "Savior, tell me your name." At that moment, Kareen was looking at her, holding a handkerchief in his hands. He said that Arisha didn't need to know his name, so she decided to ask him again. Kareen placed the handkerchief on her forehead, closing her eyes. Kareen asked her to stop thinking and rest more, and he would wake her up when the antidote was ready. He was looking at her, holding the handkerchief in his hand, the pot of antidote still hanging over the fire. From then on, as few people as possible should have known about Korin's actions, but it was time to clarify the situation. He drew a circle with a stick and it started to glow red. As the title Heroic Legends of Arkhan suggests, it was a story about a hero. As long as the player clears up all the incidents and accidents in the academy, he becomes the hero and savior of the world. The guy was standing in a passageway with a stone arch and a sign reading Merkaba. Under his feet was Silud, also his own, but with a cloak. The hooded men stood impassively, and a large purple sphere towered over them. The only reason why the Devil Park Sihu went along with the story is the final boss, which must be defeated without fail, otherwise the world will end. Two guys were sitting on a large pile of dead monsters and admiring the views, but now one of them is dead. Who will take his place? Zaihu was lying on the ground. His eyes were dead, and there was a knife in his shoulder. Korin was an AAA class knight, the successor of a martial artist, and an additional player. He sat there with a completely serious face. He was going to be in Zaihu's place, but Korin was not happy with the way the player's duties were handed over to him. There were system errors. There was no access to any player functions. Korin became an additional player, but could not use any of the player's privileges. Kareen just sat there thinking. He was inspired by the system, but in the end, nothing changed. With just knowing the future, it is very difficult to become a worthy replacement for another player. The fire continued to burn, and Korin thought it was necessary to use something other than the system. Korin has been training hard for 3 years and is no longer an ordinary NPC. Korin used his finger to draw a red circle on the ground again, which caused a small swirl around the fire. Korin stared at this mesmerizing phenomenon. He desperately tried to survive. In his previous life, being prone to magic, he studied only one direction runes. These are ancient symbols with magical powers, duty, restriction, and an oath. The runes are painted with crosses, rhombuses, and arrows. These runes are known as the Three Commandments runes, which are some of the powerful laws of this world that are the source of superhuman strength and the cause of destruction. Korin wanted to engrave all the runes on his body. I bit through my finger and started drawing a rune on my shoulder with my blood. He was in pain, but he engraved a rune on his arm. By voluntarily taking an oath, the caster gains additional power from this commandment. You can promise not to eat chicken or something like that. However, this is very easy to adhere to, so the increase in stats is minimal. Heaven's scales weighed against family happiness between him and the chicken. A chicken is a person's vow that costs very little, unlike a family, which can also be an oath and give a large increase in stats. So Korin must make a demanding vow that he will follow to the very end. And so the rune was engraved on the hand. It was so hot that it emitted steam. Korin was bound not to ignore the misfortunes of good people. Korin's stats will increase as he completes the quest. The heart was locked up and otherwise, Korina expected a fine of 10 times more. He started on the second rune, drawing again in blood, burning his skin. With this rune, he limited himself, no longer perceived spirits. Everyone in this world has a spiritual perception. Spirits of water, fire, and so on. There are also immaterial ghosts and elementals. These creatures only come into contact through mutual knowledge. Small ghosts have been bothering people, but they can't hurt those who are unconscious or have no spiritual perception. And failure to comply threatens 600% damage from opponents. Now the spiritual perception is at 0. He is completely protected from all such creatures. Korin finished with the second rune and started on the third one, which is called the Oath. This commandment is directly associated with great risk, because it uses the weight of the promise as a source of strength. The last rune was on his collarbone, and because of its weight, neither Korin nor Park Sihu used it in their previous lives. Even though Zaihu used up everything in the system, he ended up losing. In Korin's memories, Zaihu looked at him with a reckless look. There's no point in worrying too much, that's what Korin thought. Korin was beginning to merge with the runes. He was tired, but he was not going to give up and endured until the end. He told himself that he would save the world. This is the oath of a warrior who aspires to truly great ambitions. The heart is chained. This was because Korin had finished with the commandments. The application of the commandments to an additional player begins, and failure to do so will result in certain death. After activating the commandments, Korin's eyes began to glow with a bright red flame. The girl wakes up in a strange place and does not understand what is happening. A nurse approaches her and learns about the girl's state of health, but she still does not understand where she is. After her question, she finds out that she is in the emergency hospital of the city of Merkaba. The girl wonders, but who brought it there? In response, she only learns that the person who brought it has just left. She's not allowed to move, but she's surprised that the person who brought her to the hospital left a few minutes ago. The girl realizes that everything is fine and tries to find her things, but finds only a bag that she sees for the first time and thinks that it belongs to her savior. She decides to look at it, but when she takes the belt, she sees that there is still blood on it. The girl angrily calls out to the nurse, who comes and looks at the girl in fright because she doesn't understand what happened. The girl is concerned about the question of whether sweets with honey filling are sold nearby, but the answer was that she could only eat ice cream. 3 days pass after the completion of the training quest, and the day of the Merkaba Academy entrance ceremony begins. The main character searches in his student wallet to get inside, but suddenly finds a letter. The hero cannot remember how he put it there. Opening it, he read, "My son, you have no idea how proud I am of you. Like the great protectors, become a wonderful person who protects many other people." The hero can't guess when this letter was planted for him. The hero's name is Korin Locke. He was an ordinary strange child, but even he has a family. When he got his body, he felt awkward and strange, remembering how they sat as a family at the table, where they still treated him like a family member. That's why he started loving his family from this world. That was the difference between him and Park Sihu. Students who have just entered the Merkaba Academy, including Korin, discuss what the academy looks like and wonder how many trains there are in it. A girl with blue hair interrupts their discussion and asks the new students to gather next to her. The girl meets Korin and finds out that he is also a new guy. looking with surprise at his height, suggests that he eats a lot and offers him potatoes. Kareem doesn't understand and says, "Potatoes." The girl leads a tour and tells them that they are in a science hall, where students magicians are engaged in research. The girl's name is Maria Dunner. She is a first-class magician and at the same time a second-year student of the academy, one who goes forward on a smooth and wide road, being blessed by everyone. Continuing to tell the students what and where, she draws attention to the training hall. It gives out various interesting weapons. However, life goes on as usual, and people in this world continue to face numerous misfortunes and tragedy. Maria will also feel the depth of despair in the future, because she is the final boss of the first arc. As the students leave, they hear Maria asking each of them to take one regular and one sweet potato. She says goodbye to the new kids and leaves by train. We are shown the Freedom Hall at the Merkaba Academy. Above Korin, there are magic seals on the ceiling. But he wasn't surprised at all. Suddenly a magician shouted, "Space expansion magic." All the students were terrified, didn't understand or see anything, but not Kareem. He was completely calm. The magician who said the magic words asked the children not to panic and was surprised at how easy it was to confuse the young cadets. All the students took off, and Korin was still calm, but he recognized the voice and guessed it was old Harmon. Kareem noticed that he was still the same, and it felt like they were in training camp. The history of mankind in this world is a constant battle with demons. The most effective weapons against demons are superhumans who use aura and mana. Merkaba Academy trains just such people. The silhouette of a man appeared in the shadows. He greeted the students and introduced himself as Professor Permak Daman, who was in charge of this year's freshman welcome ceremony. Kareem was glad to see him and remembered how long it had been since he'd seen the professor. Permak appeals to the students because they all gathered to become knights and magicians. And if they went there, they will surely get their licenses. However, he doesn't like to see some weaklings among the students walking around with their heads held high, so he decided to take a look at their abilities. All of the students started looking at their aura, mana, abilities, and overall grades. Korin's stats were terrible. His aura level was low, and his mana level was very low, which made him rank 6. He himself came to the conclusion about its disgusting indicators. The professor explained that the students see their overall grade in front of them, and asked them to get up to the number that corresponds to their rank. There were about 400 people with Korin, and he was 1% of the worst. After determining the students' grades, the professor wished them all good luck in the battle. This year there were a lot of talented freshmen, and a woman with glasses suggested not to evaluate the first and second ranks because it is pointless. Let them wait for the other participants' tests to finish. Students of the second rank were Granddaughter of the Sword Emperor, Arisha Arden, Druid of Avalorn, Yule, Mercenary Sword Master, Doron Varsky, Golem Maker, Cranal Ludin. The only student of the first rank was a girl, namely the Heavenly Yaksha, H. Warren. The bespectacled woman was surprised at the thought of enrolling such a freshman. Another mage in a cape doubted the sense of checking the 6th rank, even if the 5th rank students didn't seem to be very good, and suggested that the weak students with the 6th rank should be eliminated. To which the bespectacled woman angrily said that the chairman wanted all students to follow the path of learning. The cloaked mage was startled and suggested that we start. A briefcase with a gun fell in front of Korin. Someone said that the monsters will appear in 30 seconds and asked to do everything possible to deal with them. During this test, participants are sent to an empty space and forced to fight monsters. Kareem noticed that there was no friendliness, as there always was. With 5 seconds to go until the test starts, Korin starts choosing his weapon. Most 5th and 6th ranked students would probably grab the first weapon they saw. Most likely it will be a sword. Korin had also chosen him in his previous life. The test starts in 3 seconds, and monsters have started to appear on the battlefield. 2 seconds before the start, we learn that it is a low-growth hound, a monster of the 5th rank. Although the swords are cool, they say that it takes 100 days to master a spear, 1,000 days to master a blade, and 10,000 days to master a sword. A second before it starts, Kareem picks out a spear and throws it at the short hounds. Kareem killed one of the 3 hounds and apologized grandly. Then he killed the other 2 and remembered that he had killed them so many times before. It took the hero 12 seconds to kill the 3 hounds, but passing this test in his previous life, he couldn't even kill them and flew out. However, things are different now. He will finish off all the monsters in the highest rank. Korin was happy and asked to release new ones. 5 minutes later, no one showed up, and the hero didn't understand why. He began to think that the system had failed. The other students couldn't even handle these monsters. The cloaked mage was disappointed and couldn't understand what the students would do next if they couldn't even kill such creatures. He had once dealt with rank 5 monsters in a minute and 22 seconds. He felt that since these guys were like this, there was no point in even looking at the 6th-ranked students. But he saw Korin, who was sitting and resting, and thought that the monsters did not appear due to some malfunction and sent Korin the same hounds. The hero didn't understand why these hounds had reappeared instead of the next-ranked monsters. The robed mage laughed and looked at all the students, thinking how pathetic they were. At that time, Korin once again killed all the rank 5 creatures. The cloaked mage saw the first student who passed the test and was a little surprised. It took the student 7 minutes and 20 seconds. He started to think about how the 3rd rank would need about 2 or 3 minutes, and started looking at his charges again. He saw Korin again, and he didn't know what was wrong with this guy, why he was in this position again. He became sure that summoning monsters was malfunctioning and something was broken after all. The other wizard couldn't believe it, because Madame Josephine's magic had never failed in 20 years. The cloaked mage was sure that Korin couldn't defeat these creatures and had to fly out, and he was sitting like this. The only conclusion is that summoning monsters doesn't work. But another wizard insists that this can't be the case, because if the wizard didn't personally see that no one showed up, then the summon is still working. The mage in the cape decides to try again, because he is sure that this is some kind of failure. The monsters have appeared in front of Korin again, but this time he is tense because the same hounds are appearing. He yells angrily that it's not like they're training a dog, and kills all the hounds again in 7.3 seconds. The cloaked mage and wizard with whom they discussed the system glitch are taken aback by this speed and don't understand how this is possible. They call Professor Permac and ask him to take a look, but first they find out what the minimum time the test took for his wards was. The guy named Jaeger passed it in 3 minutes and 30 seconds, but the professor didn't understand why they asked him. The magician cannot say why he asked this question and refuses to answer it. He assumes that Korin was the son of a hunter, since he is so good with a spear, and decides to send him a monster of the 4th rank, namely a frosted boar. The mage thinks Korin can't handle it, but Korin kills that monster in 3.7 seconds. The mage continues to increase the ranks of the creatures he sends to Korin. Now there was an owlbear, a 3rd rank monster. The monster attacks Korin, but he dodges and tries to stab the creature, but the owlbear drives the hero away. Then the student uses Kenas and sets the creature on fire. All the mages and professors see this and don't understand how Korin was able to use rune magic. Even Professor Permac was surprised. There was no special effect from the reception, so the hero decides to block the monster's view, and this is enough. The man with the white hair and mustache is sure that this student is definitely unusual, but unfortunately, there are only 3 monster ranks in the test. For the first time in a long time, an entertaining student appeared, already looking forward to his battle with the demonic spirit. After saying that, they started the test with the 5th rank demonic spirit. Korin realized that they were definitely summoning something else, but he couldn't see or hear anything. This is all because of the limitation, I don't perceive spirits. It does not allow him to recognize any spirits, so they will also not be able to contact him. He closes his eyes and waits to see if everything will be as it seems. He counted from 1 to 60, but nothing happened. That's right, his idea definitely works. After checking everything he wanted, Korin smiled and said that he refused. As a result, he failed the test with demonic spirits, where he refused the 5th rank ghost, and was disqualified from the test with the 4th rank witch spirit and 3rd rank banshee. But in the monster test, he set new records everywhere, from a 5th ranked creature to a 3rd ranked creature. Korin approached the robed mage and told him that they had done a good job. And the magician was stunned. He could not realize that the hero refused. He didn't know who this guy was. All the students gathered in the hall and began to communicate with each other, find out who received what rank. 2 of the students noticed Korin and remembered that he had killed the owlbear and the banshee. We are introduced to a new character named Jaeger Hinspetter. This guy picked a fight with a student at the very beginning of the story. Park Si-Hu killed him because he was annoyed. Kareen also thinks Si-Hu is a psychotic guy, and even though Jaeger is, but at this age it's normal. In the academy hall, the students started to mock the 5th rank. It's definitely difficult to intentionally lose. So there are those who can't even beat the dwarfed hounds and ghosts. It's about Lark. In Korin's previous life, this guy couldn't handle his inferiority complex. After slandering the hero and Si-Hu, he suffered the same fate as Jaeger. Academy President Iryu Kasar interrupted Korin's thoughts and greeted the students. They entered this academy to become strong. Some have already succeeded, and some still have a very long way to go. There are no guarantees that they will get what they want after studying there, but there is hope that they will be able to find their way. The academy wants to help them take the right first step, but the second step will only be their responsibility. That's all. All the students dispersed. Jaeger walked down the corridor and proudly said that from now on he was a 3rd-ranked knight, Jaeger Hinspeter. But he notices Lark and decides to ask him what his rank is, to which Lark hesitantly replies that it's the 5th. Jaeger began to mock him, telling him how weak he was, unable to defeat a ghost or even a short hound. Corinne came up behind them. Jaeger sees him for the first time and asks Corinne who he is. Corinne didn't answer the question, just stared at his tattoo. She was amazing. It must have been made by a very talented craftsman, and it looks very neat up close. It shows Jaeger's blood type, probably so that if he is injured, he can quickly receive a transfusion. Impressive preparation. Jaeger noticed that Corinne knew something, and it was his mother's job. Initially, she specialized in line work, but at the request of her son, she got a tattoo in the style of old school. Corinne noticed that she was amazing and asked about other tattoos, but he already knew. When Jaeger disappeared in Corinne's previous life, his mother came to the academy. She said that all these tattoos were not made for show. She was worried about her son entering the academy. This is the parent's heart. Jaeger continued to show the tattoos. This time, he showed a floating chariot symbolizing the Merkaba Academy. Corinne said it was cool and gave me his name. He met Jaeger. Corinne and Jaeger remembered Lark, and now the three of them knew each other's names. The blue-eyed girl was watching them interact, and she was glad that Corinne had so naturally saved someone who was being. He seems like a good person to her. Corinne, on the other hand, made a good impression on Lark, as if his specialty was memorization. The hero smiled maliciously, because he found a free skill book. The blue-eyed girl found the smile cute and wondered what kind of person Corinne was. Most of the facilities at Merkaba Academy are free of charge. Food in the canteen is cheaper than in other places, and they do not charge a fee for living in a hostel. Most of all, students are recommended a training hall. The reason for this is simple. Using the gym made impossible training sessions possible. For example, fighting with spirits that Corinne can't see. He was noticed by two guys because a first-year student is engaged in spiritual body, and usually such training is held in the second semester. Corinne must have come to the gym because of the rumors. After all, countless sophomores can't even catch a wind-type spirit body. Corinne didn't manage to keep up the spirit. He thinks it's still too hard for him, just like for the rest of the freshmen who will try this workout. The instructor came up to him and said that Corinne was still a novice, and he didn't understand why he needed such training. Corinne replied that he wanted to improve his spear skills and was training in such a way that the instructor was not sure that the hero would be able to handle it. Corinne calmly replied that he could handle it, but he couldn't understand why this old man would approach him. Corinne began to think that there might have been something wrong during the entrance test. The instructor thought about it, but happily replied that he liked Corinne's mood and handed him 10 food stamps. The old man said that if Corinne could handle the training, let him find him and get the praise. Corinne didn't quite understand, but he was glad of it. At the meeting, the hero was afraid, but this was unfounded. This man is using food to show his disposition, and that's probably a good sign. Maria, the girl who gave the first-year students a tour, told Corinne to try again. He tried to win, but missed an attack to the torso and fell. Corinne simply lay there, sweating profusely. A sophomore girl came up to him with a glass of water and threw a rag over his face. I asked how hard it is for the junior year. Corinne replied that it was rather tedious. The girl suggested that he rest because the hero worked hard enough. He just needs to get used to it, and one day everything will work out. So he should try again next time and handed over a glass of water. Corinne considered. He doesn't have a next time. Perhaps he was back then, 3 years ago, together with Park Si-hoo. They possessed a stat window, potions, and skill books from the combination window. However, Park Si-hoo is no longer around. He killed him, so now he has to do everything himself. After thinking about it, he thanked the girl and said that he could give up at any time, but he had to become the strongest. He has got up and first of all wants to know the limits of his abilities. It might be a bit much, but we need to check what abilities from the past he can use. He used a series of techniques: Sinister Snake Strike, Wind Swing, Blocking Counterattack, Reverse Rotation of the Heavens, and Mountain Throw. It doesn't have a strong body, powerful magic power, or aura. Knowing the future is useless in a battle with monsters and geniuses. To stand up to them, he had to work harder than anyone else, and this is his only advantage. Corinne was serious. Those 3 years of life won't let him down. Corinne used the Calamity Serpent and threw a spear. Maria also thought that he just threw a spear and decided to give up after all. But no, this throw allowed him to be caught. Corinne was hit on the soul, with the help of the Serpent of Calamity, the slithering serpent. The girl was shocked. Commonplace words like strong or outstanding are not appropriate to describe this guy. But Maria had already found the right phrase. He's just amazing. Corinne flew up and fell to the floor. The girl was afraid that something had happened to the younger one, but everything was fine. Corinne had overdone it for this body. The next day, Maria met the first-year students. Today, she will introduce them to the visits. The girl was showing off the pride of their academy. Karin was lost in thought. First of all, he needs to take care of his body in order to fight properly and improve your physical abilities without any elixirs. Maria continued to show the students around the academy, while Corin thought about how he could improve his skills. He came to the conclusion that there is only one thing that could help him with this. These are the commandments. He promised not to ignore the misfortunes of good people. Corin saw Lark, who was reading a book intently, and walked over to him. The hero greeted his friend and invited him to eat together and talk a little bit about grimoires. Lark was a little scared. A grimoire, a skill book, simply put. After reading what is written in this powerful artifact, you can acquire skills or their characteristics. The Merkaba library is known for its impressive size, and also serves as a place for storing and transmitting knowledge from generation to generation. This is all nonsense. Karin and Lark were already in the library. They were looking for grimoires. The library is actually a repository of grimoires. Corin began to think, if you want to hide the tree, then hide it in the forest. Lark understood. He asked Corin, most importantly, to keep his promise. Corin reassured Lark. If he fulfills the conditions, he will receive a grimoire with a characteristic. Lark is a real hard worker, an intellectual and an exemplary student. He remembers spells and keeps them in his book. Of course, the quantity doesn't matter, because you won't be able to use everything. A low-level mage with a small amount of mana will not show good results even with a great theoretical part. But the grimoire is a different story altogether. Karin began to search the books alphabetically. Lark shouted for Corin to stop fiddling. Before he could finish speaking, the hero dropped the book and was glad of it. It turns out that he was looking for a secret room. Lark was surprised and didn't understand how Corin had found the hidden door. They went inside. The room was eerie, but Corin called Lark and told him it was time to fulfill his promise. They should try their best. Lark agreed and clarified, "You need my help with the spirits, right?" Karin slapped his friend, who didn't finish speaking, and laughed angrily. He said it was time to start. Corin was crouched in front of Lark, who was lying on the floor. He had come here primarily to help Lark, but he also needed to complete a special quest. He opened his brown eye and looked to his left. If the spirit can be captured here, it will be able to obtain the desired hidden fragment. However, there is a small problem. A huge man with a bare chest and red eyes. A special demonic spirit, Savancha Duke. The hero sits on his haunches, hands on his knees, and thinks. This quest is actually impossible to complete. The hero raised his hand to his chin. Corin didn't know how to catch a special spirit at all. Purple orbs appeared above the spirit, and it began to stretch its arm. Also a warlord who ruled the south 800 years ago. The spirit's attacks were flying at the hero, and he was crouching down and preparing to dodge. Most players will recoil from his attack at the very beginning of the quest, but this does not apply to the hero. All attacks pass through it. It has a limitation. The evil spirit was all red and attacked the hero from above. The hero does not perceive spirits, so Savancha Duke's attacks on Corin simply don't work. The hero scratched his face and couldn't see anything. The hero decides to turn to the spirit. Savancha Duke was in shock, and his face was burning red. Karin asks him to move into his friend's body, because the restriction prevents him from seeing this creature. The hero picked up Lark, with spirit standing behind him. We are shown the silhouette of a monster with red eyes. In this world, there are so-called factors that turn ordinary people into something like demons, vampires, or werewolves. For example, one day, Savancha Duke awoke as a vampire and killed his servant. He saw it and tried to cover his eyes with his hands. The evil spirit was snarling, and the veins on its neck were protruding. His attempt to rein in his new instincts failed miserably. The whole family was leaving the castle. In the end, fearing harm to his wife and daughter, he evacuated his family and closed the castle doors. We are shown a grimoire that emits yellow flashes. Wanting to avoid a bloodbath, the Duke used magic to seal himself inside the book, the same grimoire kept in the library. Lark suddenly went berserk, and red flames radiated from him. He lunged at Corin. Maybe it was his vampire instincts that prompted him. The hero looked ahead and thought. He had brought Lark to this place for another reason. Lark attacked the hero, but Corin dodged. The fact is that a person who is possessed by this spirit can reveal their physical potential. Corin hit Lark and he fell to the ground. And the model student Lark in Heroic Legends of Arhan has the lowest strength score. The hero stepped on his friend. It's a pity about this guy, but there's nothing better to complete a quest with Duke than killing Lark. The hero pressed even harder on Lark and pulled his left hand back. Everything will end, and Corin will be able to get high-rank items. For example, Duke's cloak and vampire armor. We are shown Park Si-hoo. These items were used by Puck. These items will play a big role in future events. Karin smiled and knew they were different. Lark's eyes glowed red. Kareen decided to ask Duke if he was curious about his wife, Luna Duke, and daughter, Cecilia Duke. The hero was sitting next to Lark, who was on his knees with his hands on the ground. What kind of life they lived after he sealed Duke. The hero held up a finger, and Lark was no longer kneeling, but just sitting next to the hero. Corin told him a few stories about how Luna had died after leaving the castle. What a great adventurer Cicely has become. There is a reason why the hero hates Park Si-hoo's method in this world. The main character was smiling and the light was shining on his face. After all, he, Kareen, had a family here. He continued to talk to the spirit. Tears began to fall from Lark's eyes. Duke would have liked to end this poor soul's life with dignity. He apologized for lashing out at Corin and thanked him for the stories. Kareen was laughing. The student was fine, because he hadn't been hit, and Lark had hit him. Kareen didn't finish. However, the spirit still had something to ask. They talked for a long time before Duke finally left. Books floated in the air. After the demonic spirit left, Corin received the soul ashes of Savantia Duke's special demonic spirit. The grimoire, the book in which Savantia Duke's soul was imprisoned, contains abilities and spells that he can get after reading. The book glowed red. After reading it, Corin received a new ability, regeneration of a persistent warrior. As long as he, like a warrior who has not lost his fighting spirit, retains an incredible will, his body will recover. Corin held a bag and a book in his hands and remembered that the terrible man Park Si-hoo had this ability. But he has no idea how strong this ability is, because Puck wasn't crippled. Lark regained consciousness and began to rub his face. Kareen had asked him not to strain too much. He had been possessed by the spirit all along. Lark's jaw hurt, but his friend started whistling and pretended to have no idea why. So saying, he silenced Lark. The hero held out the hand that held the book. Corin walked over to his companion, squatted down, and handed the grimoire over. But Lark didn't believe he could take the book. Comrade Karina immediately opened the book and read with a smile. The last reason Corin chose Lark was because he wanted to see a hard-working person get a well-deserved reward. Notification of debt fulfillment. Kareen gets 80 stat points, and Savantia Duke gets her debt. Corin held Lark, who was barely able to stand. The hero is surprised by this number of points. To get this much, you would have to level up 16 times, because one usually gives you 5 points. The hero carried Lark back, and behind them the room began to disappear. Corin continued to think. There is no notification about the promotion, which means that all this reward is for one quest. He doesn't understand why they gave him so many points. Maybe it's because of the fact that you can't distribute the points yourself. A notification appeared about meeting your duty and allocating stat points. Kareen Locke did not ignore the misfortune of Lark Bergman and Savantia Duke, for which he received 80 stat points. They show us the training hall. Maria offers the children potatoes, and no one refused her. Then she went to Corin, who was warming up, and found out that he was going to be practicing with spirit bodies again. The girl closed her eyes and smiled. She believes in the younger student and is going to encourage him. The other students were eating potatoes and were angry. They don't believe in Corin. They don't understand how a low-ranked first year can handle a spiritual body. After all, yesterday it didn't work out. They ask not to encourage him and believe that the newcomer is encroaching on Maria's attention. Maria opened her eyes and looked at Kareen. The girl believes in him. Maria was standing next to the students, and they were waving money. She decided to bet 2 gold pieces that the younger one would succeed. In response to her words, the students also decided to put. One of them wagered 70 silver coins to lose. Kareen is perplexed. The freshman doesn't understand why they're betting, because he just came to practice. Putting the thought aside and concentrating, he picked up his weapon. The hero is confident that he will be able to cope, because he received points for the quest with the spirit. But Corin is interested to know how much stronger he has become. Corin swung his spear, and dust began to rise around him. He decided to start the test with the weakest move, namely a sinister snake strike. The hero threw a spear, the end of which was orange in color. Last time, he won with Slithering Snake, the most difficult Calamity Snake technique. Therefore, he assumed that using the weakest one would probably be hard. There was a flash of white light, around which a monster could be seen. Everyone was amazed. Corin was able to win with a single blow, and even with such a weak technique. Even the newcomer himself was surprised that he even opened his mouth. He thought it was too much. Kareen turned to the girl. Maria didn't look surprised and spoke to the hero. It took him 3 attacks yesterday, but only 1 today, she noted. Kareen agreed. Maria was smiling, and Kareen was just looking at her. But again, he didn't understand how she knew it. She must have watched him train yesterday. More importantly, the mage can't track the Calamity Serpent's attacks, but she has some unthinkable vision. Maria suddenly handed the freshman a bag containing his share. He didn't know why. The girl explained that thanks to Korin, she earned some extra money, so she should share it. The other students were sobbing. The hero did not fully believe in the words of Maria, who already hinted that she might not share. There was money in Corinne's eyes. Corinne said he liked it. He happily took the bag and thought that people who hate money don't exist. Having said what a clever girl Maria was, the younger one asked her to continue to be like this. Night fell. Corinne ate and thought. In his previous life, he had desperately honed his skills, but even so, he could barely complete the 5th of the 6 steps to enlightenment. The hero continued to eat potatoes. He still has a long way to go, but he's making progress with the spear faster than expected, so he doesn't worry too much. Korin began to draw a ladder-like seal with his finger. His problem is rune magic. He has an incredibly low mana pool and can't use Hagelas. The hero stuffed his cheeks with potatoes and chewed. In his previous life, he had never been able to deal with it because rune magic required an incredible amount of mana. Only he will solve this problem and surely become stronger than himself in the past. He needs to think carefully. The hero strolled along the pillars. Suddenly, his ear heard something. He knew immediately what it was. We see the city at night. It doesn't matter how hard he tries to hone his spear skills or master rune magic. After all, there was already someone in this academy that he couldn't beat. The hero shifted his gaze to the right. The only character that even Park Si-hoo couldn't handle. One of the strongest in the heroic legends of R, a notorious balance breaker. Sky Yaksha H. Warren was sitting under a tree and holding a book in her hands. The hero closed his eyes, sweat pouring down his face. Corinne can't even begin to guess what the girl is doing there or why she's talking to him. He decided to just ignore it and leave. She's a bomb that can't be defused. H. Warren sat under a tree and looked at Korin. The hero held a potato in his left hand and also paid attention to Yaksha. H. Warren's eye was red. The first-rank girl started the conversation, and she believes that Korin is not the master of this body. Corinne is terrified and water is running down his cheek. The hero turned his face in the direction of the girl, and his eyes were frightened. He can't believe that H. Warren knows that a student has taken possession of this body. H. Warren sat in the open air with her hands between her legs. She is a very controversial being, a Jiangshi, an animated corpse with the souls of a human and a demon in its body. It is said that the eyes of those who are stuck between life and death can see the color of someone else's soul. Korin stared at H. Warren intently. It would be strange if she didn't notice anything. The girl stared at the hero a little intently, and the moonlight fell on her face. H. Warren tries to find out how Korin feels about destroying and consuming the original soul. The guy puts his hands on top of each other and calmly replies that he has no idea. But in the previous life, the hero thought about it a lot. We see Korin and his exact copy, but in blue. The hero thought that Corinne and he were different people. He didn't know if the memories of Korin were his own. And if so, then who is he? Who graduated from middle and high schools for boys, the faculty of kinesiology, and served in the military on Earth. Young Korin was lying on a mountainside somewhere. He realized that none of this made sense. Only half of the girl's face is visible. H. Warren is different from the hero because the original soul is still in her body. The girl confidently says that Korin is not the true owner. The hero's smile disappeared and a look of sadness could be seen on his face. He is only the thief and stealer of this body, and he has no rights to it. Korin looks at H. Warren, who is sitting under a tree with her hands in her lap. He calmly tells her a story that there is a guy in the neighborhood of his hometown who turns into a green giant when he is angry. His name is Bruce. The girl does not understand who the conversation is about. Korin pointed to his head and continued the conversation. He said the funny thing is, his self-loathing personalities are good at completely different things. But H. Warren still doesn't understand what Korin is talking about. They show us the starry sky. What the hero is trying to say is that it doesn't matter if it's an original soul or a newly formed one, because both of them live and coexist together. Korin smiled and said, whether they want to or not, they were already born in the same body. And birth is not a sin. H. Warren gritted her teeth. The girl does not agree with this statement. The wind picked up around her and leaves began to fall. She believes that there are those whose birth is a sin. The hero's face was sad, and he looked at the point. Korin knew how this 3-year-old child was suffering right now and just left after saying goodbye to H. Warren. The girl continued to sit under the tree. The next day, the hero went to the southern part of the academy. There's a reason he left the dorm before the birds started singing at the beginning of the weekend. There is a task board in the middle of the hall. The hero needed her. He was standing by the board, and he raised his hand to his chin. On it, you can find large and small orders that will help you level up before starting the next main quest. Therefore, this is a necessary item for the player. The hero was looking directly at the board. However, the goal wasn't to level up, so he didn't need to focus on these missions. He just wanted to check something out. Kareem lost track of his thoughts. He saw a girl standing next to him. She stared at the task board. Right now, he realized that he didn't know much about Arisha. After all, in the previous life, Sihu had dealt with her. He called out to Arisha. She bowed her head and said hello. Korin wondered why she wanted to take the assignment right on the first weekend, since it was unlikely that she, being the second ranked, was desperate for results. Ardent Arisha tilted her head down. She confessed that she needed money. The hero was surprised, because the academy had to allocate impressive funds to the girl. Arisha started to cry. Due to the fact that her parents have a very high income, she receives nothing. The hero was looking at Arisha with sweat on his face. Korin felt sorry for the second rank. This system reminded him of the scholarship system in Korea, where children from rich families are not given financial assistance. Hero and Arisha were standing near the board, but the girl was even more sad and finished off. In addition, everyone in her family is of the opinion that children should earn their own living, so no matter how much money you ask, everything will be useless. Korin realized that her situation was complicated. The hero pointed his finger at the board. The girl was immediately overjoyed. He drew her attention to a very effective option. It was a patrol mission. They both raised their hands. Someone said that up to 3 people are accepted for the task and suggested that they go together. But they didn't go together because Korin had plans of his own. The hero was looking at a piece of paper with a task. It was his precious weekend, so he chose the best task to earn extra points. He had to find Butterfly, a 2-year-old cat. This was his first assignment. The hero walked away from the little girl with her mother and waved to them. For completing this task, he would gain little experience, as well as money, but his goal was the commandment. Korin was fighting monsters in the sewers. If he saves and returns a kitten that was almost killed by water monsters, he can save the owner from losing the pet and depression. The hero returned the kitten, and the girl burst into tears. A notification appeared about meeting the duty and distributing points. As a result, he did not ignore the misfortune of Anna Macmillan. Korin is glad it's working. They will be able to benefit from even the simplest tasks. With his joy, he scared the little girl. Korin became obsessed with glasses. He met a young guy who was surrounded by hooligans and thought only about glasses. The hero also found a ring for a married couple, but still thought only about glasses. He was like a madman doing tasks and thinking only about points. Korin's pupils became very small. Suddenly, the hero remembered that there was something more important, which he even made a note of, but still almost forgot. He found a house with a red roof, from which came the single phrase, "Not that." There was a beefy man in the house, banging on the table. He had broken the table, and food was being cooked on the fire behind it. The man said that he used more than 10 ingredients, including garlic, carrots, and pepper, but the sauce that could make the chicken delicious even after cooling down did not turn out. The man heard a voice behind him and tensed. Korin was standing in the aisle. He said to add corn syrup. The hero's eyes were red and his smile was frenzied. He said the problem would be solved immediately. Korin was gone, and the man was looking at him. The man didn't understand who this crazy guy was and couldn't figure out who would have added this ingredient. He decided to add this sauce to the skillet. Nothing had changed, and before he could think about it, he realized that the taste was excellent. Korin joyous walked farther away from the house. He needed to do this because the Koreans here are hard-pressed without Yanam chicken. The duty notification appeared again. Korin got another 5 points. The hero was very surprised. Even such desires activate the commandment. Korin held up his hands and shouted that it couldn't be better. A person who cooks Yanam chicken can't be bad. Korin was laughing all over the street, but H. Waring was watching him. The girl looked down and thought that the hero was strange. Behind H. Waring, a bespectacled woman who was taking a freshman test appeared. She was looking for the first rank and left her alone because the girl had no intention of leaving the city. However, H. Waring must ask for permission if she wants to leave the academy grounds. But the girl turned away from Madame Josephine. The bespectacled woman just stared at H. Waring. The first rank was remembered by Corina, who smiled and said that birth is not a sin. But she also had a flashback to the guy who had viciously shouted that H. Waring shouldn't have been born. The sun was beginning to sink below the horizon, and she just stared out at the city. After H. Waring's memories, we are shown the hunting grounds. Madame Josephine was standing on a wooden pedestal, and all the students were looking at her. Today they will have to demonstrate their survival skills. We see a map of routes to the hut. If they get to her, they'll pass the test for now. All newcomers were asked to wear armbands that match their rank. Arisha was already standing, wearing a blue armband. In the hut, they can return them. Korin was standing with a book in his hands, smiling maliciously. The time spent will affect the number of points awarded, for which you can get a prize. Korin tried to find H. Waring, but he couldn't see her. She never took part in practical tasks because she was too strong for general tests. Arisha walked over to Korin. who had his hands in his pockets. The girl thanked him. Thanks to him, she easily earned extra money. He said he was glad he could help. Korin handed Arisha the candy he'd bought for his younger sister, but couldn't eat it himself because of the sweetness. The bespectacled woman whipped her whip and announced that the test was starting. Purple seals appeared above the students. The hero closed his eyes and smiled as the purple light fell on him. He noticed that he had seen various magicians, but only Madame Josephine was capable of creating spatial magic on this scale. She's still the same great witch. The hero was transported to the forest, and in his hands he had a spear. Korin heard a sound and turned his head. The test had only just started, but already he could see someone fighting. In the forest, 2 students were fighting with swords. Even skilled people need a lot of attempts to pass the test of the hunting grounds. This is the so-called battle royale, where the player appears at a random point and can score points by getting other people's arm. Korin ran past them and told them to have a good time, and they glared at the hero. Red smoke was coming out of the hero's finger. The most dangerous person in the test was Arisha with the blue armband of the 2nd rank. The hero ran through the forest and held a hand in front of him, from which red smoke came in the shape of an arrow. Since H. Waring isn't participating, if he deals with the 2nd rank, the rest of the contestants will just be free points. The candy Korin had given me before the test was marked with a tracking rune. Arisha probably didn't know about this. Korin's eyes were red and saliva dripped from his tongue. Thanks to the candy, they will definitely meet again. Korin was running through the forest, still wearing the same mad smile and shouting Arisha's name. At the same time, Madame Josephine was walking towards the forest, and a man with white hair was standing behind her. Despite the fact that there are other professors there, it doesn't hurt to be safe. The woman with glasses looked back before leaving and was scared. She didn't see H. Waring. The woman thought that the chairman had dismissed her. The chairman was smiling, and before Madame Josephine could finish, he interrupted her and said that he hadn't sent anyone. She left on her own. Dust flew off H. Waring's heels. Rank 1 was running after Korin, and he didn't know it. The girl was calm and had her hand on her chest. Something must have changed in her heart. In the middle of the forest, we hear shouts that we need to catch someone. A girl who is very tired from running asks why they are acting this way. Doesn't it seem unfair? That girl was Arisha, who had already defeated several men. She shouts that there are a lot of them, but she is alone, and then one of the guys answers her that only her abilities are unfair here. When suddenly another contestant jumps out from behind the bushes and attacks surreptitiously, shouting that she has already passed out. But before he can reach it, a huge boulder hits him and pushes him far away. The one who threw such a stone was Korin. His appearance was quite intimidating, and his eyes glowed with a red light. Arisha was glad for him, because he had just saved her, and that was all she expected from him. Arisha was very confused, because Korin said she's beautiful, Arisha. So she asked him again what he had just said. But Korin just attacked her, and shouted that he meant the blue bandage on her arm. Arisha started to cry, and replied that she believed him and thought he was a good person who was giving her candy. It is narrated that Arisha is a knight of a purely physical type of the 2nd rank. She is not yet able to use her border eyes properly. But compared to the rest of the 2nd ranks, Arisha's individual combat power is quite mediocre. Korin Locke made a very creepy face by pointing at her, saying that she could be a good girl if she gave him the blindfold. But Arisha wasn't going to give up the blindfold, so she took a stance and was ready to parry the blow. Although Arisha is no match for her truly brilliant sister, but she is still ranked in the top 1. She easily dealt with the 7th, 3rd, and 4th ranked disciples who had rallied against her. Therefore, a rank 5 knight didn't bother her at all. But I didn't care about it about 30 seconds ago. Arisha blocks Korin's next punch, and it's clear from her that she's already tired, and she doesn't understand what's wrong with Korin, why he's so strong. Korin Locke looked like a true warrior, his smile crazy. He continued to attack her, throwing a lot of punches in a short time. Arisha still couldn't understand why he was so strong, as he alternated between closing in on her and moving away to counterattack. At some point, she came up with a plan and was preparing to execute it. The plan was that she saw that there were gaps between his attacks, and so if she hit him, she would win. Choosing the right moment, she launched a counterattack, closing in on his body with her sword. But Korin just smiled and said that her practice had suffered due to her over-reliance on talent. After saying this, he used his spear to twist her weapon, and at some point, pinned her katana to the floor. He looked quite bold and knowledgeable, but Arisha was completely at a loss. There are 3 basic actions: dodge and deflect attacks, push down on your opponent's weapon, and make a direct hit. All these 3 actions were repeated by Korin, which allowed him to conduct the simplest and most perfect counterattack. He pushed Arisha away with his spear, causing her to be terrified, and flew several meters away from such a blow. But she decided not to give up, and so she slowed down with her feet. And then she was very scared, because she realized that if she hadn't blocked this attack with her aura, it would have been very dangerous. She was trying to collect her thoughts, so she was sweating all over her face. And she wondered if it wasn't because of his strength or speed, just that his skill level was top-notch. Arisha can't figure out who this person is, unless he's a 5th-ranked knight. Korin Locke stood there with a smile, and knew that he had defeated Arisha while she was sitting on the ground and knew that she was defeated. Kareen took her blindfold and told her that he would take care of her. When suddenly a noise began near them, and clouds of dust appeared. Korin Locke couldn't make out what the noise was. Suddenly, he blocked the huge sword strike, even though it was a sneak attack. He began to look closely, trying to determine where the blow came from, and from the impact, he realized that this sword was quite heavy and was made of a special iron stone that was 4 times denser than steel. This sword started flying towards its owner, who said that it was able to block his attack. The blonde guy picked up his sword, and several more swords were flying around him. And he said that Korin should give up the blindfold and just leave. Korin saw him with a bandage around his mouth, and thought that Doron Varsky had come to see him, and he just didn't want to cross paths with him. He was able to defeat a huge number of opponents single-handedly, and behind him was a trail of losers, both players and monsters. After such a massacre, he doesn't even have a scratch on him, so the difference between him and Arisha is clearly noticeable. Kareen, still holding the bandage in her mouth, says that there is nothing to do, and since this meeting has taken place, it's time to run. And so he just happily runs away from him, because he knows that fighting him now is not the best option. Doron was confused and just watched him run away, but then he started to prepare himself by straining his legs and using the ability that can be seen in his eyes. He saw something blue in his teeth, so Doron began to run after him, and everything exploded behind them, and swords flew in Korin's direction. He was shouting, "What's wrong with this madman? I thought he didn't do anything he didn't get paid for. And why are you running after me, Arisha?" She's also terrified, so she says she doesn't want to die, and she doesn't know where the exit is yet. Korin looked preoccupied, and held the blindfold in his hands, and thought that there was no point in a fight, and he just needed to carry the blindfold. Suddenly, in front of him, he saw a huge golem and a red-haired boy. He smiled maliciously and said that if Kareen wanted to go further, he would have to give her the blindfold. The red-haired guy's name was Kranal Luton. His ability was golems. Arisha was surprised, and Korin's face showed that he wasn't very happy to see it. Arisha shouted that it wasn't fair to block the only way out. Kranal was in front of them, and Doron was behind them, and he knew that he was in a strange situation. So he stretched his neck, and thought that trying to avoid one fight, he ran into a fight with 2. But there's nothing you can do about it. And immediately, he took up a stance while Arisha was confused. She's shocked that he's going to fight 2 people at once. There was a spark in his eyes, and he said that if he couldn't avoid a fight, then he had no other choice. Kranal started to order the golem to attack, and Doron ran behind him, throwing swords. It was already evening outside, and at that moment someone started knocking on the door, and behind it there were questions about who was the first to pass. The first to pass was Korin Locke, who looked very happy and had 3 bandages in his mouth, so he asked if he could collect his prize. The director said that he was very impressed that Kareen was able to bring as many as 3 bandages. And Korin said that he was very lucky, and we see how Kranal and Doron lost. Arisha was a little confused and happy to see this. She thought it was unbelievable that Korin was able to break through the core of the magic sword before it could reach its maximum power. And he stuck the other sword deep into the ground so that telekinesis wouldn't help him reach it. Korin dodged the swords he couldn't block, redirecting them to the golems. Then he moved behind Doron, using him as a human shield. And while Doron was fighting the golems, Korin neutralized them by attacking the crystals. After that, Kranal was defeated as well. Korin stood with the bandages in his hands, and there was an aura of victory around him. Arisha believes that his speed of reaction, judgment, and even psychological warfare seemed to belong to a man who has fought on the battlefield countless times. Kareen had it all sorted out in an instant. Arisha was so shocked by his victory that she just stood there with her mouth hanging open. She noticed that his basic spear skills, experience, and techniques used to overcome weaknesses were similar to her sister's. Hence, she immediately remembered his snide smile and the words that her practice had suffered due to over-reliance on talent. She let out a sigh of relief, then clenched her fists hopefully and decided that she needed to try too. Doron was very upset and looked at his swords with sadness, and he thought that he was attacked without being allowed to demonstrate strength. He did not understand what kind of person this is. It seems to him that Korin has long known about his techniques and abilities. Kranal also lay on the ground, defeated, and recalled Korin's words when he had looked at him with a haughty gaze. Golems are only big targets for small and strong opponents. If I were you, I would find a friend to become a security guard. To which Kranal replied that he had no friends. Korin did not hear and asked again, and Cranel repeated that he had no friends. Kareem looked shy and wished him luck. It shattered Cranel, and he almost started to cry. We were again shown a shot where 3 freshmen lost this battle, and each of them remembered Corin Locke in his own way. And he stood happily in the hut of the winners and hummed songs under his breath. It is narrated that now there is only one strong participant left on the hunting grounds. It was a druid who guarded the forest, and even the roots of the trees embedded in the ground glowed green. The green-haired girl started to cast some sort of spell. Her name was Yule. However, there are more than just participants. In the middle of that forest, a girl who wasn't a participant summoned a huge water sphere. Her eye was glowing, and she was standing in front of a strong stream of water. She was the strongest opponent, and she was also the greatest mage of the Merkaba Academy. This very magician was Maria Dunnerf. She looked cheerful and had blue hair. Suddenly, that huge ball of water just exploded, spilling water everywhere. Yule was soaking wet because of this, and since the seniors were taking on the role of monsters and helping with practice, Yule was very unlucky with Maria. That was when the hunting ground trial ended, or so everyone thought. Maria came to Yule and asked her that she was probably a new student, and then introduced herself. Yule also introduced herself in response. Maria was smiling. Suddenly, H. Waring appeared behind her, and Maria noticed, so she asked her name. H. Waring looked very serious. While H. Waring was holding a guy in her hand, and there were a lot of opponents around her, Maria asked that she was probably looking for someone, since all these guys looked the same. But then she brushed past her, and Maria immediately stopped her by summoning a huge block of ice, and then smiled maliciously, and said that she was sorry. Although she could ignore her, but Maria could not ignore H. Waring, because according to the rules of the test, she is now a monster. H. Waring turned to her and said that it annoyed her so much. At that moment, in the hut, the director is surprised to say that Corin scored 117 points, and this result has not been seen for a long time. Kareem Locke asked if he could choose his prize then. And among the prizes, he saw a dagger made from the fang of a frosted boar, a protective leather cloak, and the bile of a shark bear. Corin thought about the prizes, since the most valuable item of all was shark bear bile, but he already knew something. So he gave a thumbs up and picked out a mandrake seed. The headmaster noticed that he had a good eye for choosing this item, and then he went up to him and asked him what he was going to take for the remaining 17 points. Corin thought about it again, and decided that he should take 2 cards that contained nutrients for the plant and earplugs. When he came out of the hut, he was glad that he had made a very profitable purchase, and never in all his countless attempts to complete the game, everything turned out so well. 2 kids run towards the hut, one looking quite strong and the other small and cramped. Kareen is surprised that even these guys have passed, because this is the first time he's seen this. The jock yells that he finished second and got 19 extra points, and the shy guy says he gets 15 points. Kareen greeted them, and said with a smile that they had done a good job together. The jock replied that it was easy, and he suggested that they work out a little more in the gym. When suddenly, Cranel, who was trying to leave without anyone seeing, turns around, because Corin shouted at his back that if he has so much strength, then it's better to help them find the golem core. Then Corin came up to him and asked him what was the most important thing, and if so, they would help him with the search. Cranel was very shy and replied that everything was fine. But Kareem knew that he was too shy to say that, so he added that it was usually the time to say thank you. Then he exhaled calmly, and a smile could be seen on his face. And then he thought that he had collaborated quite a lot with Cranel Luden in his previous life. After all, the role of tank golems in battles with semi-large monsters is very large. Meanwhile, the ordeal had come to an end. Having found the very core, Cranel was very happy to see it, and began to restore it. Arisha Arden was injured. Doron Varsky stared at his broken swords, and he was stripped of his fighting power. Uel was lying face down in the ground for so long that Corin thought she was dead. Picking her up, he began to carry her, and wondered if she couldn't have died, and where the professors were looking anyway, if it was only important to be alive, and not in a normal state. Uel could barely say that Maria was doing something to that girl, but she couldn't connect the words. Suddenly there was a great rumbling in the forest, and Corin wondered what was going on. The rumbling started due to the huge number of beasts running through the forest. Uel was still not conscious, and was muttering incomprehensibly. Corin was surprised by this. Maria was standing in the middle of something, and it was said that a mage who had been spared failure, frustration, and despair had an innate talent for magical analysis and a blessed supply of mana. Maria is to succeed Professor Josephine. The sky was very bright, and just like on the hunting grounds, Maria manages the difficulty and also helps her younger ones grow, as if in a game. Maria continued to struggle with H. Waring, who had a lot of abrasions on her, and she said that she needed to get tested. But H. Waring didn't seem tired and just jumped on top of her, shining a red light. Maria noticed this and started shooting ice crystals at her, but H-Waring just flew through them. Maria became very worried and decided to just protect herself with ice blocks because she understood that low-level magic would definitely not help block these attacks. H-Waring flew right into that block of ice, and although Maria had promised the senior professor not to use any attack magic above the average level, to be honest, she had already used a few advanced spells. Then suddenly Maria saw something that made her afraid. And in other words, Maria must have denied it, but she had already used up most of her power. And what Maria saw and was afraid of was that H-Waring just smashed her defense with just one foot and flew into it, so that Maria flew all the way into a tree. From Maria, a huge footprint was left in the tree. Her hands were shaking, and she said that H-Waring didn't come near her. After all, what is standing in front of Maria is not even a knight or a magician, and the battle with her is no longer a game at all. It is just a natural disaster embodied in human form. H-Waring looked very intimidating and just walked straight at Maria, who started using her magic. And H-Waring made her squeal with fear, so much so that Maria screamed at her not to come near her. Suddenly, a voice from the sky called for H-Waring to stop, and strange particles could be seen in the sky. Josephine suddenly stood in front of Maria, and then asked if she was okay. Maria removed her magic, and it was clear that she was fighting hard. After saying that she was fine, she just collapsed on the ground. Josephine saw her, and just didn't say anything. We are shown the forest where the test took place, and they tell us that during this test, several surprises were revealed. Then we see Corin's leg, where he says first, the knight of the 5th rank, that is, I, received the highest number of points and became the first to pass. And secondly, there was a battle between the most outstanding first-year student, H-Waring, and the strongest second-year student, Maria. Maria was already asleep in her own bed. Corin was leaning on the wall, a little nervous, because he was even a little scared that she might be awakened by the boss. But now everything is normal, so the plot is unlikely to depart from the original. Then he started walking out of the building, and decided that he would just think about it a little later, since he still had about 3 weeks before Maria's final awakening. And now he had other things to worry about. Corin came to the edge of the hunting ground forest, and started looking around, looking for someone he wanted to meet. Then he threw back his head and began to drip drops into his eyes. And right after that, he deliberately pretends to slip, and deliberately plays a scene. And the seed that he took as a prize started to sink, so he shouted that this seed was given to him by his mother. After all these machinations, he had a very villainous smile on his face, and immediately behind him someone asked why he was crying so bitterly, but our hero was already glad that he finally came to him. Turning around, an old man stood in front of him, a hidden element whose power can only be used once in the game. It was the god of the golden axe. There is a well-known story about a woodcutter boy who drops his iron axe in a lake, and about a god who asks if the child owns a gold or silver axe. And since the original version was about unique weapons, there is no point in throwing low-level items into the lake. Kareen had tried to throw about 500 different items in there in all his time. But one experienced player started a challenge with random items, and some of the participants threw very rare items into the lake. This reference was left by the developers, giggling. The old man came out of the lake, and Corin was crying on the shore. And the old man asked him if he owned a gold seed or a silver one. Kareen said no to all of this. The old man began to smile kindly, and asked what ordinary seed is his. Kareen, in tears, said that it was his seed, and thanked the old man. There are 3 item cards, and the old man said that Corin could have chosen gold or silver, but he chose the simplest one, so he decided to reward him for his honesty by giving him all 3 seeds. The old man started walking back into the water, and Corin started bowing and thanking the old man for it. But then he started laughing, throwing seeds, and said that they can be cloned. It is said that a regular seed significantly increases the mana pool, but gold and silver have very special effects. And these hidden elements can only be obtained in this way, although the only problem is that mandrakes are very loud, but this is not so important. In his previous life, Park Si-Hu ate the golden seed and he ate the silver seed, but now he is very happy because he has all the seeds. But then he came to Maria's castle, and said that the reason for Maria's awakening as a unique rank vampire, and the boss of the first arc was because of a mission related to John Doe from Misty City. Kareen doesn't yet know how the demonic factor will manifest in Maria's body, but they still have time. He recalled the moment when there were 3 losing contestants, and the reason why he showed off in front of them was because no one would fight alongside a weakling knight. But innate talent and strength are the first things that will interest such people. As Corin walked through the castle, he knew that they would recover in a week, and then he would suggest creating a team. There was a bright moonlight in Maria's room, and Corin decided that the team would need to be created before the first Arch's boss, Maria Dunner, a vampire of unique rank, awakened. Maria was already out of bed by the full moon, even though there were still 3 weeks left. Suddenly, her Isabel also woke up from this and asked in surprise that Maria was all right, and then said with displeasure that that first year should have held back because Maria was limited to low-level magic. Maria was silent and just stared at the moon as Corin pondered that if he could prepare well and earn the trust and enough participants, then he could easily save Maria from an unfortunate fate. Until then, he decided to help Arisha with her training and hire Doron to manage the swords. Persuade Yule to participate and get close to Cranel. After thinking about this plan, he clapped his fists and happily said that the plan was perfect. It only needed to prepare well and everything would be fine. By then, Maria's eyes had turned red and she was already seeing Isabella's food. Maria grabbed her by the shoulder and shouted that she was thirsty. Suddenly, we're transported to Josephine's office, where H. Waring closes the book and says it's boring. Josephine exhaled and said that she shouldn't have been sent, and if she wanted Josephine to teach her something, then she would personally give her lessons, but in the meantime, she should reflect on her behavior. H. Waring sat in her room, closed, and thought that maybe she should escape through the window and climb over the fence, when suddenly Corin hung outside the window and said with a smile that he knew she would be there. H. Waring was startled by such a guest. Corin was hanging on a branch with something in his hands and said that her name was H. Waring, and they had already met recently, and then introduced himself and asked if she could open the window. Then he handed her a beautiful cake, saying that he chose it at random because he didn't want to come empty-handed, so he took it. H. Waring pointed her finger at him, and he just laughed. She said that visiting this place is forbidden by the Academy's rules, but Corinne replied that he was just hanging from a tree, and said that apparently Josephine is currently absent. Corin started to think about Josephine, and thought, I came just in case, but H. Waring doesn't have a scratch on her. Had she been locked up and barred from receiving visitors because of what had happened on the hunting grounds? That's how to keep a person locked up for more than 4 days. It was inhumane, even though she was half human. While H. Waring was saying that the professor had been gone for 4 days, Corin's hanging branch broke. He flew down and asked her that she hadn't visited him once, and H. Waring said that she hadn't. Then Corin fell to the ground with a huge crash and activated the Hardy Warrior's regeneration. H. Waring was curious to see what was going on with him. When he left, he said that they would see each other later, and he would buy her food later. Corin runs and thinks that Josephine has left, leaving the most dangerous person, H. Waring, in the Merkaba Academy. He believes that something unusual is happening. Suddenly, 2 people ran past him. One of them asked the other if he had found her, to which the guy replied that he was going to comb the area. Corin noticed them. They were 2 former protectors, Professor of the Faculty of Magic Dana and Professor of the Faculty of Knights Fermac Damon. The man was standing in front of the door and asked about Corin Locke, saying that his request to visit was rejected. Corin replied that he wasn't there for that, but asked that he was a guard from the 3rd group, Crone. Madame Josephine gave him some food and drink. The man was very satisfied and took the food, saying that Madame Josephine really takes good care of the lower-ranking ones. The man started to eat, and Corinne was thinking about the fact that his request to visit was rejected, and Isabel, who was next to her, was missing. He knew that in the first place, the fact that a guard was assigned to the infirmary was already strange. The more he thinks about it, the more it seems to him that all his suspicions are correct. When suddenly the guard starts to have a stomachache. Corinne asks what happened to him, suggesting that maybe he has a stomachache. He added that there was a bathroom in that direction. The guard immediately started running away, while Corin smiled maliciously and waved at him. The guard asked him to guard the door a bit while he was out, but not to go inside. The hero wished him a safe journey and added that he would never enter. After going inside, he started to get very worried and hoped that he was wrong in his assumptions. Grabbing the bedspread, he asked that his suspicions be proven false. He pulled back the bedspread and asked if it was Maria, but it wasn't Maria in the bed. Corinne was upset because in the place where Maria should be lies the same missing Isabel. When he saw the mark of 2 fangs on Isabel's neck, he knew that there was no doubt in his mind that the professor was trying to hide it. Corin was very scared and excited, because by that time Maria had already awakened as the first boss. He slapped his face at the whole situation. We started showing all the boss phases, and the first phase is a mob of monsters that is easy to deal with. The second phase is to contain it. This requires magic circles, and after the advantage obtained, you will need to deal some damage. In the 3rd phase, they will have to fight a powerful enemy that is rampant in the blood realm. After defeating the 3rd phase, another final one begins. It has a key final mechanic. All 3 important characters are standing together, and even if you collect all the named characters to get to the 3rd phase will not be so difficult. But Arisha Arden is injured because of Corin, and Doron Varsky lost his combat power, also by the way because of Corin Loke. And Cranial Luden restores the golem core, and again our hero is to blame for this. He clutched his head and was horrified, because all the named characters are incapacitated because of him. We are shown a man in smoke with bright red eyes, and the hero says that in the original, after one encounter in a foggy city, Maria attacks her roommate and goes on a rampage. In his previous life, after this happened, he and Puck and everyone else were waiting under the dorm where Maria and Isabel were staying so they could quickly deal with everything. He remembers what he did to Arisha and realizes that everything is now a mess because of him. And Arisha's bones must have been shattered because of his punch. And the core of Cranial's golem is destroyed, so it's useless right now. He was thinking about Warring, but there was no telling how the situation would change if she joined them. So he came to the training hall and said it's like an employment commission, mercenary. The difficulty is extreme. You need to find someone and take them alive. Doron stood there with a puzzled face and asked if he was crazy or something, since mercenaries have a rule that if they can't win, then you can't join such a battle. Not only that, but his sword is broken. Korin interrupted him, showing him the item and adding that he would give it in 20 gold pieces. And then he added that he could take it as collateral. Doron's eyes were sparkling, and he immediately agreed to join his group. Korin went to the library, where he was examining a book next to Ul. She asked him how he knew about such things, because she believed that all the records were burned along with the forest. Korin replied that he had read it once in a book and asked her that she was using the Agam as a power, and that was why she had come to the library. He looked at her confidently and said that if she would help him, he would teach her everything. Ul was a little worried, but she asked what she needed to do. She immediately joined Korin's squad. After leaving the library, he went to the dining room, where he sat across from the gamekeeper and Lark. Kareen told them he was looking for a band. What he plans is quite difficult, poorly paid and very dangerous. They can also die if they encounter a particularly dangerous monster. But if they succeed, they will definitely receive honor and glory. They both considered the suggestion, and Kareen was beginning to think it was too much even for them. But then immediately Lark and the huntsman agreed, saying it was quite romantic. As a team, they were walking through the forest, and now it was time for the first phase. This is the best they can do right now. Korin remembered Puck's words that she cried and hid in the forest, and it was very difficult to find her. He couldn't believe that such a strong person would dig a tunnel in the forest and hide for a whole month. There was a spark in his eyes, and he decided that since he had said that she was hiding in the forest, and there was only one forest in the Merkaba Academy, they should go to the hunting grounds. When they came to the forest, they wondered if it was really there. As the whole team walked through the forest, they began to ask him questions, and found out that they were looking for Maria, and assumed that they would be looking for her for another couple of years. Yule was a little shy, but she said she could help. Then she immediately struck the ground with her staff, and particles began to form around her, and she asked the spirits to take her to Maria. Lark and Jaeger were very surprised, saying that a lot of spirits appeared. Korin could tell from their reactions that there are countless spirits responding to Yule's call, but of course he couldn't see them. So he was upset and asked if they had found Maria. They were all looking at Korin in fear, so he asked why they were looking at him like that. Before he could finish saying that they were right behind him, he immediately repelled the monster's attack. And then he cut it in half, asking why so suddenly. They shouted at him that there was a crowd of monsters behind him, and the Jaeger asked that it was Maria who turned into one of these monsters. Kareen said no. But then Lark started to use one of the spells, and Jaeger smiled and shouted how dare they attack the hunter, and it was just perfect for his warm-up. While Jaeger was fighting ahead, Corny shouted to him not to rush forward, because they would simply surround him. He ordered him to take 3 steps back and not rush in, but gradually reduce the number of enemies. Lark was behind him, and he told him to cover the rear. And then he threw himself into the fight, telling Yuel that she was staying with Lark, and then asked if there was anything to explain to Doron. He just needed to stay close. Doron understood him instantly and began slashing at the monsters, thinking that Korea wasn't even fazed by the sudden attack, and he was giving out the right commands and distributing support. He considers him not only strong, but also an experienced leader and strategist, leading the group correctly, just like a commander. Korin used his spear to cut down all the monsters, preventing them from passing through. Doron can't believe that this is a knight of the 5th rank. It doesn't make any sense. Awarding such a rank is a big mistake. Jaeger shouts to Yuli that he thought about Maria being, but ends up with a never-ending mob of monsters. Yul replied that the spirits had told her so. Someone asked that Maria controls all these monsters. And Lark, fighting off monsters with his book, replied that such monsters never walk in such groups, and they seem much more ferocious than ordinary individuals. Kareen, cutting down another monster, replies that Maria is not a puppet master or anything like that. She can't just control these monsters, and even if it were possible, she wouldn't be so unreasonable to control them. Suddenly, the wave of monsters stopped, and the entire team was standing in a circle, waiting for a new one. They asked then what it might be, why they are attacking them. Corrine replied that there was something else, and he said it in a very creepy voice, that the monsters attack according to their habits. It is possible that a situation has accidentally occurred that caused the monsters to forget about their usual habits. They all listened intently, and were a little surprised, and then Corrine added that it was something they just couldn't resist. They had to run. A ferocious Maria was walking towards them, her eyes filled with madness and her fingernails were huge. They all noticed her and started to worry, and Corrine shouted to them to get ready for battle, and Yule and Lark to the rear. And Doron and Jaeger will take a step back, as they are in support. Doron replied with a smile that he seemed to have a plan for this, and therefore he would trust him. Jaeger was also ready for battle. Corrine could see the fire in his eyes, and he said that he would lead the way. The third commandment, which was about saving the world, was activated. His stamina was increased by 50%. Corrin's stats were weak, his aura rank was low, and his mana rank was very low. Then he tightened his grip on his spear and began to ponder the fate of Mary, the impact that it will have on this world. It must be that the power-ups I received are not based on a one-time event of the first arc, but on the impact on the world that it will have in the future. One of the commandments about saving the world appeared, and he was told that he must take the first step on the path to saving the world and stop Maria Dunner. They all stood there as a fully prepared team and decided to finally finish this. We receive a notification about a conflict with the first commandment. The duty of saving the world contradicts the first commandment, because there is a possibility of Mary's death at the hands of Ad, a gambler, and this is contrary to the commandment of duty. Maria was completely reincarnated as a vampire. A notification appeared that the script was updated. A card with a new task. They must save Maria Dunnerf. Suddenly, she began to cry, and Yule noticed. The mercenary Doron had told her that it didn't change anything. They began to subdue the demon. They threw a sword at Maria and waited to see what would happen. But she stopped him with a red electric sphere, and no one understood what it was. Such a heavy iron sword was blocked. Lark recognized the move. This sphere, it's a familiar born from the blood of a vampire. No one would have thought that a newly awakened vampire would be able to create such a sphere right away. Corrin reassured his companions. Don't be afraid of a vampire. This is just a newborn who can't properly receive Maria's blood and mana. So far, it can only block attacks. Doron noticed that the familiar covered the greatest need of mages. The need for protection is a serious problem. Corrine was calm and replied that everything was fine. The demon was angry, wishing the team would disappear and launch a ranged attack on the area. The druid began to cast a spell. All hope was in Ul, and she knew it. She created a seal on the ground. She didn't know much about the other places, but they were in the woods now. The forest is obviously the scene of the druid Avalorn. Ul had grown trees in front of the team, with the help of rapid growth and the protection of spirits. Maria's attacks broke through the tree wall. Ul was having a hard time holding back the attack. Lark and Jaeger were terrified, and they assumed that the defenses might not hold up. The girl tried her best. After the trial at the hunting grounds, Yul's heart is throbbing because she has already lost half of her mana. But it must survive. For some reason, Corrin ran his knife through the trees and knew that the druid of Avalorn had almost reached his limit, all because the human had made him a ridiculous promise. The hero smiled and said that Yule needed a little more. In just 5 moves, they would switch sides. Her face was covered in sweat. She hopes Corrine keeps her word. This is possible with the current Maria. She's absolutely furious. The boss battle with Maria Dunnerf is divided into 4 phases. In the first game, the surrounding monsters attack the player. 5 people defend themselves. The demon starts casting seals. And in the second stage, Maria appears in person when the monsters are defeated. The girl screams. You need to complete all the stages after the second phase to get to the final boss mechanic. Maria's attacks gradually pass through the wall. In other words, until then, Maria doesn't use all of her power. Everything is the same as it was in the game in Corrin's past life. The hero told Lark that he should leave before Yule, as he could only use a couple of low-level spells. Lark was surprised that Corrin had calculated that, too. His smart friend had done a good job. Once Yule joined him, they should immediately go as far away as they could. Lark said he understood and walked away. The trees began to melt. There were many large-scale attacks so far, but they didn't differ in power. Crystals passed through the wall. The real problem is the alchemical magic that follows these attacks. Corrine tensed. There are even more crystals. It was an alchemical freeze magic. All the crystals burst. Maria began to scatter Yule's defenses. Jaeger was terrified, but the other warriors were relatively calm. The druid of Avalorn says that the land that feeds the trees and grasses, gods and bugs, ashes are ashes that allow you to keep the world filled. Yule looks at the engraved words. A strong wind started blowing across the ground. Yule Evil was very confident. Although she was the one who engraved the words, only a pure-blooded druid would be able to activate them. New trees have grown. There are similarities with runes, but in fact it is an ancient text with its own system and methods that belong to a different time of antiquity. Secret writings that can only be obtained by completing a line with Yule, during which she becomes the sage of the forest. Forest sages, conservationists. Doron and the huntsman were surprised, riding on a 1,000-year-old monument that belongs to a clan much loved by spirits. A wicker man, a giant willow puppet, appeared around the 4 warriors. Yule was happy, but Corin just smiled. The girl did not believe that it was really called. Corin helped her with the appeal. Of course, it's not fair to do that, but in this situation there was simply no other way. The hero pointed his finger at Jaeger and told him that there was a live owl bear among the monsters. I should have thrown it to the wicker man. Jaeger didn't know that. Corin pointed up and smiled. He was right. This monster is still alive. And this was all prepared by Corin. Although his comrades must not have noticed while they were fighting. Jaeger was shouted at to leave him already. And the huntsman threw the bear. The monster hit the wicker man. The owl bear was reduced to ashes after being struck by lightning. Jaeger didn't understand why this was happening. Flames were coming out of the wicker man's chest. As long as the victim is burned inside it, this golem-type magic weapon can move. The demon started attacking the creature's face. Go ahead, wicker man. He waved his hand and green clouds of smoke appeared. Yule clutched at her heart. She was in pain. This is too much for her. With the speed of events, it would be difficult for her to last even a minute. Corin looked at Yule and shouted at her not to stop. If she stopped controlling the wicker man, their entire team would die. She knew it. This golem was already standing in front of Maria. She started throwing spears at him. The wicker man kept coming at Maria. The team didn't understand if it was normal for so many copies to hit it. To which someone said, don't worry. Jaeger was tense, but Doron just watched. The wicker man is not a living being, but a constitution. It won't break if a couple of holes appear in its body. And if you think logically, in the fight between ice and fire, the winner is obvious. A large spear is thrown at the golem. This spear pierced through the wicker man. Corin didn't understand why. He thought until the creature's fire was extinguished. Before he could think, the wicker man fell. Corin's face was angry. The common sense that was turned upside down and collapses before his eyes. On the demon's face, the eyes glow bright red. This is a special level of difficulty. This is Maria Dunnerf. Yule fell to the ground. Everyone was shouting at her to back down, but she didn't want to. Corin's face wasn't tense, and he said that Yuel's presence here wouldn't change anything. She was walking away, and Jaeger wasn't sure. He thought they might not be able to handle it on their own. Corin adjusted his spear. Maria used all her ranged attacks. This means that it's time to deal with it. Corin charged. Jaeger and Doron started running after him, shouting for him to wait for them. Maria started to throw spears, but the boys blocked them. Doron threw the sword that was changing its trajectory in the air, and hit the red ball that was surrounding Maria. Beads of sweat began to form on Doron's face. The girl is up to Besiachigo strong. Jaeger leapt over Doron. He hit Maria from above. It was Jaeger's special attack, growing destruction. Corin was glad of the reception. The power of the attacks that he encountered accumulates. This is a very useful thing. Jaeger was smiling. He was able to break through the demon. But do not relax. New notification. Phase 3 is activated. The demon's eye became even brighter. Mary has taken off. She's using the blood realm. A frightening black circle appeared on the ground, with a red light. The sword was stuck in the ground, and the mace was lying nearby. Jaeger and the donor also fell, but Corin was standing on 2 legs. Time seemed to have stopped. They are immersed in this realm. When the blood sphere is destroyed, it activates the trap they are currently trapped in. Maria summoned a monster that looks like a wolf. Corin exhaled calmly. He never thought that he would be the last one left. Usually, by the 3rd phase, you need to be at least 3 people. Corin slung the spear over his shoulder, and the wind began to move across the ground around him. It doesn't really matter to him that he's alone. The result will be the same. A red moon can be seen above the building. Humans are able to distinguish cattle from humans. It is natural for a person to squint and cover his eyes when he sees the desperate struggle of cattle that do not want to die. The chandelier falls to the ground. Strange air flow. Maria in human form is lying on the floor. The cold air flowing from her spine to the tips of her toes contrasts with the burning sensation in her throat. Maria looked away. She saw a strange girl calling out to her. The neck of the unknown person turned out to be attractive. Maria bit her. Tears welled up in the girl's eyes. Maria's fangs, as naturally as if they had always been there, tore through the skin and reached into the blood vessel. The cattle shook absently. Whether it was fear of the butcher or fierce resistance, she didn't know. It's not so important anymore. Maria didn't even feel the need to close her eyes or close them. Maria continued to bite the girl's neck. The girl started to fall, but Maria still didn't remove her teeth. The sound of painful moans is sweeter and more beautiful for her than a melody played on a piano. The warm blood rushing into her mouth waters her throat, flows through her and warms her chilled skin. Maria was covered in blood. There is also blood on the corner of the bed. She feels her blood vessels dilate again, and Isabel's moans and the creaking of the bed turned. Maria clutched her face. All that was left was the throbbing of her heart, which spread to her entire body. The delicious smell of blood suffocates her to the point of disgust. Her body, which seemed to have been filled with vitality, now seems to be collapsing. After all, she finally realized that there were no cattle here. Another girl with white hair approached Maria. She committed a crime that turned out to be the murder of a friend. The moon turned blue. Tears began to flow from Maria's eyes. It was as if she had taken the life of an animal. No, even worse, someone was running through the woods. Realizing that Maria had mistaken the man for cattle, the girl clutched at her hungry stomach, and she ended up running away. There were only traces of blood on the ground, hiding until the kid came after her. Still the same Corin pose, with the spear on his shoulder. The red demon in the form of a wolf started to scream, and Corin shone blue. The demon's mouth was filled with something. They were balls with spikes that he threw at the hero with the spear. Corin swung his spear. He executed a 6-step kick, the 4th step. The hero ran at the demon and used the reverse heaven rotation technique. He shouted that this creature in the form of a dog has no right to bite people. The demon clutched at his chest. 2 dogs, as tall as a man, got out of it. Corin ran confidently and smiled. He was convinced that this demon was the dog. The hero slipped past the dogs. He took a firm grip on his spear and executed a 6-step kick, a 5th step, and a mountain throw. And both dogs were killed. Corin caught the spear in the middle. He was standing near the dogs and talking to the demon, mocking it. The demon dog's face was incredibly angry. He lashed out at Corin, who just stood there and smiled. The hero started to look around, but he couldn't see the demon anywhere. He was moving so fast that there was no way to notice him. Corin enjoyed this moment and decided to teach the dog a lesson. The demon was still running around the hero. You don't need 100 steps to win. After all, the most important thing is to detect the enemy's weak points in 1 step. Corin hit the demon. He was smiling. This creature didn't stand a chance. After all, he showed all the weak points in advance. Corin performed the Calamity Serpent technique, Rising Serpent Heaven, Poison Dragon Breakthrough. One large dragon appeared around him and it stabbed the demon dog. The ball was splitting. Corin, on the other hand, stood in a crouch and watched the ball crumble. Almost the entire sphere was gone. The demon in the form of a dog was lying on the ground, and the one who stood and looked at him and laughed. The demon began to dissolve. Corin asked him if he would defend his creator to the very end, and if he had such a sin. He placed the spear on the ground and asked me to just wait. He will definitely save his mother, Maria Dunnerf. The girl walks towards the team. The final phase begins. As soon as it starts, Maria puts one of the group members in a critical condition. A black ball fell on him. That is why he will not be able to cope alone. The demon leaped, and only its outline was visible against the moon. Corin was walking, his face hidden and dark. Maria pounced on the hero. Usually, in order to save the victim, all members of the group stick together to stop the girl if anything happens. But no one can help him now. Corin's eyes were filled with sadness. The girl bit the hero. The boss has the ability to suck blood. Maria Dunnerf's stamina and mana are restored. She pushed Corin to the ground and began to suck blood. Corin had a strange feeling. That's probably how taking a life feels, but it's okay. He can handle it. After all, it is some skill that will help him in this. Regeneration of a persistent warrior. As long as a person, like a warrior who has not lost his fighting spirit, retains an incredible will, his body will recover. Corin should succeed. Pain could be seen on the hero's face. He remembered Maria when she wasn't a demon. He only returns what this kind little girl said to everyone while sharing the potatoes, holding out her small hands. Corin took her hair in his hands. Since he was an adult, he asked her to take it easy, otherwise she would choke on it. Corin lay there smiling as Maria sucked his blood. But suddenly, she pulled her fangs away from his neck. She wasn't looking at him with that angry look anymore. We are shown Duke's vengeance. After waking up, he killed his servant, drinking every drop of his blood. Even a warlord whose name is recorded in history couldn't resist the urge to drink blood. Then we see Maria drinking the blood of an owlbear. Hark see who only spent a month to capture her. She only drank the blood of monsters, which, like seawater, only served to fuel her thirst. Mary was placed in a vessel filled with water, but she still didn't kill people. She overcame her thirst and desire to drink blood with superhuman willpower. This is unnecessary for the boss, who is only waiting for a bad ending. Therefore, there must be a different outcome. At least that's what Corin wants to believe. Night fell. There are bite marks on the hero's neck. Maria came to her senses, began to cry and apologize to the youngest. It doesn't matter how many times she's crossed the line, or if she's a first-level mage. And the fact that she's a vampire is a minor problem. Perhaps Corin was only looking at this little girl as a character, but the teachings of his mentor from this world turned the hero into a completely different person. He looked at Maria in silence and smiled. Corin remembered his mentor telling him that she was an adult, so it would be her responsibility to protect Corin. The character that the hero looked down on as an NPC protected him by calling him a child. As her heir and disciple, who had seen her master's last moments and had also comprehended and absorbed her teachings, it would be good if Corin showed a bit of a more mature side. He was just lying on the ground with Maria sitting on top of him, and Corin was laughing with his eyes closed. Then he opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. She asked Park Sihu to just watch. Corin's path will be different from Puck's. Corin received a notification about completing an S difficulty mission. He raised the aura rank, the mana rank, gained resistance to pain, and 100 points were distributed equally. They show us a beautiful castle. This is a spatial prison. It was created by Professor Josephine, a master of spatial magic. Maria was eating potatoes. It looks incredibly delicious. She missed her. Corin came to check on Marie, who was in custody. The girl was glad to see him. Madame Josephine joined them. Corin asked her permission to visit Maria. He trusted her and told her that nothing would happen to him. The door was opened for Corin and he went in to see Maria. She choked a little. The hero asked her to eat more slowly, but at the same time could not understand who was serving boiled potatoes without water at all. Corin stared at Maria intently. He moved closer to her and the girl was smiling. He thought that Maria's taste preferences would change, but to his surprise, she is enjoying the potatoes. To which the girl replied that potatoes are always delicious. It tastes amazing no matter how you cook it. He moved closer to Maria's face and she was embarrassed. Abruptly, the girl began to beat Corin and shouted at him to get away from her, because Maria smelled bad. The hero didn't understand her logic. He replied that when she bit his neck, the hero was also not particularly washed. The girl was telling him to stop. They stopped fighting. The girl sat down near the bars, and Corin in the far corner. He said it didn't smell much, either. But Maria said she was scared. The hero didn't understand what she was talking about. Maria started to explain, but her eyes were fixed on the floor. That girl, Waring. It was quite scary. Maria thought the truth would die. She was just as scared and unable to cope as Corin. Corin looked away from Maria and considered. When he met Waring, he awakened something in her, forced her to change her mind and take part in a practice session on the hunting grounds. Waring and Maria started the battle. They met by chance during practice, and for the sake of fighting a first-level mage, Waring used her real strength. This provoked Maria, and the vampire inside her awoke. Maria started to remember the scene when Corin was fighting with spirit body. She asked him why the hero was able to rise up, why he didn't give up, just like that time with the spirit body. Everyone laughed at him, said he couldn't do it. But in the end, he did and was very cool. Corin was embarrassed. He said it wasn't that impressive, but he likes happy endings. Maria's eyes were still hidden behind her hair. She asked me to explain. Corin began by saying that this is when the good guys are rewarded and the bad guys are punished. Something like that. Obvious, but touching and instructive stories. He remembered what Maria looked like when she met all the freshmen and waved at them. He told her that the upperclassman was a very nice person. She's nice and sweet. Corin smiled, scratched his face, and continued. She likes good endings, if possible. What he's trying to say is that he wants Mary to be happy. The girl's face turned red. Maria buried her face in her body and asked Corin to leave. She needed to wash up and finish her potatoes. He just came in, but he agreed to leave. As he left, the hero waved to Maria and said that they would see each other again. Maria had a smile on her face. She was grateful that Corin had comforted her, but her smile faded and she lowered her head again. She herself is not sure if she has the right to be happy. The guy was walking on the red carpet, wearing brown shoes. Maria was only temporarily isolated. After what happened, of course, it will be difficult to immediately return to normal life. But the hero believes that this isolation will soon end. Since one of the demihumans, Waring, is attending the academy without any problems. He recalled the moment when Waring was sitting and reading a book. Corin walked across the same carpet, hands in his pockets. And I thought, many people will not feel any threat from the fact that Maria is a half-human. Someone called out to Corin, and he shifted his gaze. He saw the chairman, who asked the student to give him a moment of time. Corrine was surprised. They talked and laughed. It was the first time they had met in person. The chairman asked how Corrine was feeling and heard that everything was fine. But the chairman wanted to talk about Maria's punishment. Corrine was startled and put a hand on his neck. He decided to ask again. Sweat broke out on the hero's face. He could not have imagined that Maria would be punished. There doesn't seem to be any happy ending. Corin raised his hands and began to ask the chairman to wait until the hero could explain everything. But the decision on her punishment has already been made. Sunlight shone on the right side of the chairman's face. Corin begged to be listened to as someone who had fought her. Who makes the decision about punishment so quickly? Corine's face was still sweating. Before he could finish, the chairman laughed. The hero didn't understand why. The chairman smiled sweetly and said that there was no penalty. Corine's face showed that he wasn't at a loss for words. The chairman began to explain. He doesn't think Maria is dangerous either, so he just wanted to see for himself the reaction of one of those who went into battle with her. The chairman reassured Corin. Now he had no doubts about his decision. He laughed and convinced the hero not to worry. The isolation will end soon. First, they need to approve the stability of its state. Of course, he has heard the stories of other students, but he is interested in hearing everything in detail. Corrine exhaled. The chairman surprised him. It's all right. The chairman asked Corin to tell him everything. You can even use simple words. Madame Josephine approached them, and the hero explained only what was necessary, namely that Maria was not dangerous. This little girl isn't a monster. He wasn't sure if the chairman believed him, but the message was clear and open. The chairman raised his hand to his chin and thanked the hero for what he had said. In this regard, they will have to make an official statement. Of course, they will not be able to disclose all the details. In any case, now that the chairman has heard all the details, it's time for him to do his job. It was clear from the hero's face that he was listening intently, but he didn't seem to understand something. The chairman leaned forward and thanked Corin again. The hero was surprised. The chairman continued his conversation with Corin. For helping them avert the danger created by the inexperience and arrogance of adults, he is very grateful to the hero and asks for forgiveness. If anything is needed, the chairman will do his best to repay the hero. Madame Josephine merely adjusted her glasses. Corrine blushed. Eric Kassar did very well for the Academy's chairman. This person always recognizes their weaknesses and tries to take on as much responsibility as possible. Corin thought of his mentor standing against the red sky. She told him that even though she had experienced countless failures, he had never been a part of them. Remembering these words spoken by the hero in a previous life, he believes the chairman's goodwill. Corrine was smiling. He asked the chairman not to bow his head. The chairman smiled and did not raise his head. Maria was sitting under a blanket. Her face was sad. We see moments of Corrine and Maria's battle as the vampire inside her awakens. The first was when Maria was sucking Corin's blood and he was telling her not to rush. The hand that stroked her back was soft, and the skin she touched was warm. Then she removed her fangs from the hero's neck. Her common sense, which had drifted away, was pushed out by the waves of surging emotions and finally reached the shore. When the cold-blooded beast released her and her humanity returned, Maria began to cry. The only thing Maria said over and over was an apology. The girl clutched her head. What right did she have to ask for forgiveness? Is Isabel okay? Maria was one of those people who loved others more than anything else in the world, and because of this, guilt was eating away at her. Purple waves flew around Maria. It was Madame Josephine's magic. Because of her personality, the girl did not resist this magic at all, which imprisoned her, but simply resigned herself and locked herself behind iron bars. We see the moment when Corrine came to visit her. Maria pretended that everything was fine, but in reality she was exhausted. She was a beast, a monster and a demon, an enemy of humans, who from time to time craved their blood. But Corrine, who was smiling and encouraging Maria, helped her. A single sentence from him sent all her worries and doubts flying. Maria began to cry. More than anything I'd ever heard before, these words rang with honesty. After all, she remembered this guy's dedication, how he sacrificed his body to save the monster. That strong transition moment. Sincere goodwill and self-sacrifice. Through the bars, light falls into Maria's room. The girl's face turned red again, and she covered it with the blanket. She realized that a part of her life would be forever memorialized. Corrine's ear twitched. He heard two students talking. They were talking about a second-year student from the magic department, the top student, Maria Dunner. It's been a week since the incident with Maria. Although there was a lot of chaos because of the people who were against Maria being left in the academy, it quickly came to naught. After all, the half-human H-Waring had obediently attended the academy for a long time. Cooking class. Students discussed Maria's isolation. They'd heard that the older one wasn't attending classes and thought she was really dangerous, even after a week. Lark and Jaeger were brewing potions, and Corin noticed something. Maria was walking. Yes, officially, Maria Dunnerf's isolation has been lifted. All the students were happy to see her back. But that didn't mean the girl was ready to free herself. Maria looked at everyone and tried to find someone. However, this person wasn't here. Isabel wasn't with the others. Maria sat on the bed and thought that Isabel must fear and hate her. Maria remembered biting Isabel in the room. If she were in Isabel's shoes, she wouldn't want a friend who took a bite out of her, either. Maria doesn't want to get in the way of Isabel and the others. The girl was staring intently at something. It's a bag of blood. Since that was the case, she decided that she should disappear from the academy. Someone knocked on the door. Maria directed her gaze towards the door and asked who was there. Who would come at such a time? Before she could think to open the door, Isabel jumped on her and started hugging Maria. She was in shock. Isabel's eyes were streaming with tears as she asked her friend how she was feeling. Maria couldn't believe her eyes. She didn't understand why Isabel was in her room. Isabel was hugging Maria tightly, and Maria was standing with her hands up. Isabel began to think that she shouldn't come, or that Maria didn't want to see her. But her friend replied that this was not the case at all. She thought Isabel was afraid of Maria. Isabel looked at her friend in surprise. It took her a moment to understand what Maria was talking about. But the surprise on her face quickly changed to a smile. She told Maria that before she passed out, she saw everything. Namely, Maria's face after being bitten. She was crying, covering her mouth with her hands and looking at what she had done. Isabel continued to explain to Maria that everything was fine. After all, she didn't know what to do, and she was tormented by guilt. Isabel put her hand to Maria's face and told her that the past was not important. No matter what happens, she will still consider Maria her friend. Isabel wanted her friend to think of her as a friend. Smiling, she pulled Maria's tearful face close to her and asked if her friend understood what Isabel was saying. Maria pulled away from Isabel a little and burst into tears. She was thanking the friend she'd bitten. Maria thought Isabel would hate her, to which her friend replied that she had been feeling well for a long time, but the hospital told her not to go out for a while. Therefore, they could not come even when Maria's isolation was lifted. She was smiling and pointing at the door. If it hadn't been for that junior who secretly took her to a friend's room. But he was gone. The tall guy who had just been behind Isabel. Maria's eyes were bright. She realized it was Junior. Kareem walked down the hall with his hands in his pockets, and he knew that a girl like Maria Dunnerf was someone to be trusted. It won't break down because of an incident like this. Maria began to cry and covered her face with her hands. Isabel couldn't understand what had happened. Maria spread her fingers at her eye. Kareem helped the undergrad again. That's how the first part of the story ended, with a happy ending for everyone. This was not the case in the hero's previous life. Of course, there were a few unforeseen circumstances, and not everything went according to plan. But that's why he likes the result much more. The chairman and Madame Josephine were standing together, smiling. Even without a player, the world does not stand still. Karine stood smiling as the sun went down. Even if you don't follow the plan, there are still better endings. Corin was enjoying the sunset, and his eyes showed a peaceful expression. This moment helped mark the beginning of a new world. The academy members were in the training hall. Corin's days are pretty boring. Couple, lunch, couple, training, but he needs to get stronger. The hero trained with his torso bare, and his entire body was covered in bandages. Given the rapidly approaching storyline with that girl, he needs to grow even faster. Corin decided to use some technique, and his eyes turned red. It was the ultimate essence of the sinister snake. Towering sky snake and venomous dragon exit. Corin's gaze was directed to the side because someone had been impressed by his training. It was Maria, who was smiling and clapping. She told the hero that it was amazing. Today, he is training so hard again and acting like nothing has happened. Since the hero is trying very hard, he needs to eat a lot, and Maria brought him something to eat, although not very much, as she thought. She brought pancakes, fries, sandwiches, noodles. The girl brought a lot of things, and everything was made from potatoes. Corin was just a little hungry, so he'd love to eat it. He sat down next to Maria and looked at all the food. The girl told the hero to eat, but I noticed that my hand was covered in blood. She was scared, and Corin couldn't figure out why. He thought he had something on his face. She was very scared just because she saw the blood coming. Corin decided to ask, "Do you drink blood now?" The girl answered positively and pointed to what was lying next to her. Next to Maria was a bag of blood. The hero wondered if the fresh blood was different from the one in the package or not. The girl replied that they are different in taste and freshness. Junior's blood was especially delicious. Before she could finish, she felt awkward and raised her hands, but Corin just ate and smiled. I guess it's like comparing organic products with those that are sprayed with pesticides. Maria gave an analogy. It's like the difference between frozen and freshly sliced meat. Corin held a potato in his hand and thought. It turns out that Maria will have to eat cold meat for the rest of her life. He offered to drink the blood occasionally if Maria wanted it. Maria raised her index finger and debated what the hero meant. He said she could drink his blood. Maria's face turned red. She was shocked. She didn't understand what Corin was saying. He explained to her that it regenerates, so if Maria gets tired of the blood in the pack, then let her come to him. He smiled and frightened Maria. She turned away from him. He offered her a drink of blood now, to which she asked the hero not to say such things. She refused. Maria doesn't want to bother Corin. She picked up a jar and held it out to the hero. It was a vial of blood. Maria said that Corina might feel a little sick. And vampire blood is one of the best magical ingredients, and it is good for the body. Corinne took the blood and drank it in front of Maria's eyes. She said that she was embarrassed when the hero drinks in front of her. Notifications and increasing the aura rank by 1, the maximum amount of aura by 500, and getting 10 points. Maria asked if it was delicious for the hero. A faint red flame appeared around him. He wouldn't say it was delicious, but he felt stronger than in his previous life. Close-up of Corin's face with his smile. He was glad. With this potion, the hero can start that event right now. Someone was walking through the city, but only his black-booted feet were visible. It was Arisha Arden, a second-ranked knight and descendant of a family known for its swordsmanship. Her life has changed a lot. She walked with her hands in her fists and smiled. After Arisha felt an unfamiliar wall between herself and the fifth-ranked knight she met in practice in the hunting grounds, she realized that she needed to work harder on herself. That's what she did. Arisha was drooling when she first saw something. They were honey candies, which she enjoyed with great pleasure. Of course, until recently, she was lazy and did not strive for anything. Her heart wasn't in fencing. The girl came to the shop and bought her own clothes. She was almost a fencing genius, but because of her terrible attitude to study, she often got rejected. Here, she doesn't need to do 10,000 sword swings every day as long as her technique is closely watched. No need to duel with tough fighting siblings. She bought herself a dress and coat and was happy. Moreover, her sisters weren't here. She decided that she should enjoy it. She was standing on tiptoe with joy because of the things she had bought. Corin was standing behind her and decided to ask what Arisha wanted to enjoy. The girl turned to face the hero, and he looked at her and continued. She hasn't been seen in the training room for a long time. Arisha hesitantly replied that she had a lot to do. Homework is a lot and you need to complete missions. Corin pondered, pointed a finger at himself, and told Arisha that he knew how to bring the girl a lot of money. He invited her to join his squad. The girl gritted her teeth and clenched her fist, almost bursting into tears. She hadn't been amused when Corinne had suggested the idea. At some point, Arisha found it difficult to talk to Corin. When she was with him, she felt that others saw her laziness. She threw all her things and candy on the floor. The real face of the genius swordswoman who received the second-ranked Defender Knight certificate at a young age, and the granddaughter of a sword genius, was revealed. In addition, his methods were too harsh. He kept talking about the basics. Corin's face was dark, and Arisha seemed afraid of him. She wondered if it was strange at her age to try to show a cool death move. Corin moved closer to Arisha and gave her a thumbs-up greeting. 2 gold coins for the difficulty of the second-ranked mission. She began to think about how much clothing and candy she could buy with the money. Corin smiled and asked her, without lowering his finger, if Arisha agreed or not. She agreed. Corinne had told her they were leaving in the middle of next week, so he'd asked her to get her things ready. He told her that he planned to complete a short task for 20 silver and suggested that they do it together as well. It was near a building with a red roof, namely, in a blue shop. Arisha agreed. Corin's expression was sweet, and he seemed to grin reluctantly. So Arisha just needs money. It was very easy for the hero. He thought it would be enough for the event. His pupils moved to the side. He's not sure, but if he's right, the event will be held today. We see the city center, which is very crowded. Arisha liked the tasks from the mission board. She just wanted to go downtown to see if everything was all right. The monsters that were near the city were at most of the 5th and 4th ranks. 3 dogs had been killed and were lying on the ground. Occasionally, mid-level monsters would appear among them, but the chances were minimal. Arisha stood beside the defeated monsters and smiled. She's finished. The girl gave the idea to the captain. She offered to sell the skins and claws of the monsters. It's not hard, but the pay is good. Arisha liked that the task at hand didn't weigh her down. The knights from the squad looked at the girl and were startled. They said Arisha was an excellent knight. There were 10 monsters, but the girl quickly defeated them. Arisha replied that there was nothing special here. The knights were surprised to think that an owlbear was a small matter. They praised Arisha. This was expected of a swordsman from a renowned family of swordsmen. The girl blushed. but she was smiling. We are shown men with purple hair who were either surprised or frightened. Their family will finally have an heir for the Arden family's sword genius. Lunia Arden was the best genius of this generation. Compared to her, the second daughter is an illegitimate child. Her blood was originally inferior. Arisha was waving her hand and holding her chin with the other. Her family doesn't like her, but she doesn't think she's that bad. Corin stood on the hound and told Arisha that the owl bear was there, to which the girl replied that she easily dealt with him. Night fell. The patrol was easy and safe, and everyone was satisfied. If nothing has changed, then this should be enough. A flash of green light appeared in the sky. This is the signal from the previous command. There's a monster nest there, and it's at least rank 2. But the girl didn't see anything. The guard was looking at the green light with his glasses on, and Arisha was looking at him. He explained that this magical signal can only be seen with special glasses. The guards have such secret methods. If nothing particularly happens on such a mission, then you cannot kill a single monster for the entire shift. But when such cases occur, it is your duty to take part in the raid. Arisha was saddened and cried because she couldn't leave right away. The guards cheered with their hands up because the genius's granddaughter was with them. Arisha was standing next to them, and in the distance, Corin was just smiling. In the monster nest that was previously discovered, there were a large number of wolves, led by a werewolf. It was a werewolf. Arisha cut the werewolf open. She defeated him even under the influence of poison. And this time it wasn't difficult to kill him. However, a monster on a horse appeared in front of her. Blue flames were coming out of their heads. Arisha stood with her mouth hanging open. She recognized him. It was a Dullahan, a rank 1 monster, a rider with a horse, and from both of them came flames of a greenish hue. The guards were startled, and Arisha was already reaching for her sword. She had to finish him off. The girl was drawing her sword from her belt. She instantly threw 2 punches. This was the Arden style, 1 cut, territorial cut. Due to the surprise, the girl's pupils became larger. The rank 1 monster dodged all the blows. Arisha didn't understand how this was possible. It's too flexible. He's almost a clam. Dullahan grabbed Arisha. He's fast and experienced. It is at least the first rank. The monster lifted Arisha above it. The girl didn't know what to do. She sobbed and screamed for Corinne to help her. Arisha didn't have the pride of a warrior. The guard stood next to the monster, afraid, and told her that Lord Corin was fighting other monsters. Dullahan started attacking the girl. Arisha closed her eyes and prepared to die. Suddenly, a monster's skull flew over the girl's head, and she opened her eyes. The monster, holding Arisha, fell to the ground. Someone raised a sword to the girl's face. Before Arisha could thank her, she remembered who the weapon belonged to. Someone said that a knight of a certain bloodline was still weak, lazy, and arrogant. Arisha looked up and sweat broke out on her face. She was saved by the eldest daughter of the Arden family, who is likely to become the heir, the greatest swordsman of the generation, who will continue on the path of genius. Luina Arden stood next to Arisha and looked at her with disdain. This greatest swordsman was Arisha Arden's older sister. She glared at her younger sister. Arisha was very scared and even paled, looking at the floor. So Lunia asked what was wrong with her. We see Lunia's neck and her despicable voice asking why she didn't back down when she saw Dullahan, and why she didn't analyze her opponent. Lunia's eyes were filled with sparks and disbelief, and she added that the most important thing was that she had drawn her sword so strangely, and who was Arisha trying to parody so clumsily. Arisha bowed her head while sitting on her lap. It was obvious that she was ashamed, so she apologized to her sister. Lunia told her to stop making excuses, because the responsibility for her actions lies entirely on herself. And with a few words, you can't escape responsibility. One knight helps the other to stand up, holding out his hand, and asks about each other's health. And Lunia went on to say that she should have realized that her frivolity had jeopardized the soldiers who trusted her and followed her. Arisha replied that she understood everything. Suddenly, Lunia hit Arisha's shoulder with the back of her katana, which scared her a lot. She was still standing over her sister, her katana resting on her shoulder. Then she said that swordsmen of Arden should always be confident, and the younger sister obediently agreed. Corin stood swinging his spear and looked at them, which is what Lunia noticed, so she said that he should also be confident. Corin was surprised that she could see that he was watching Arisha while he pretended to be busy. Lunia was looking at him with one eye, and a spark could be seen in her. Lunia then approached Corin, introducing herself. I am Divine Sword, Grand Disciple, and also First Pavilion Sword Master Lunia Arden. Corin took a stance and bowed to her, saying that he was the 8th Spear Disciple, Corny Losh, and also that he was Arisha's friend. She looked at him as if she understood, her eyes bright blue. Corin looked at her with a smile, because he understood what she was trying to say, but he couldn't show off his spear style, because there were only 2 other people with the same style. It was a girl and a beefy man, with bright auras shining around them, hers blue and his purple. Yunia turned away from Korin, saying that if he didn't want to, then don't talk. They approached her, saying that they had dealt with all the monsters nearby. This was Lunia's elite squad, which included 5 second-ranked girls called the Five Sword. They asked if they should go chase the fleeing monsters. All the girls were of the same rank as Arisha, maybe even higher. Yunia, fixing her hair, told them that there was no need and they should go back. Arisha was scared and covered in sweat from the fact that she was told that all this also applies to her. The 3 swordsmen are standing next to each other, and the story goes that swordsmen usually like to travel in groups. And there are also sword factions that are similar to criminal organizations. Then we were shown a huge regiment of knights, all of them in the shadows, and the story continued that they follow their leaders, unite among themselves, and consider themselves a sect. 60 years ago, the sword genius Garand founded a new generation of swordsmanship. And while his family made martial arts schools famous, the Arden became a famous family of swordsmen and representatives of the continent. We see a small Japanese house. It was the Arden studio, Merkaba. Yunia holds the pipe in her hand and asks for more light. Yunia is sitting on a chair, and in front of her is a huge crowd of people who worship her. An instructor is standing nearby. This was a long-standing unique command, discipline, and they still have thuggish tendencies. Arisha sat among all these people, also bowing her head, and said, "I, a disciple of the main family and a swordswoman of the 2nd rank, Arisha Arden, welcome to the 1st Pavilion Master." People were terrified, sweating on their faces, and their eyes were empty because they didn't understand what was going on. Why force the direct disciples of the family to kneel down as well? Yunia is still smoking her pipe, looking at some documents, and reads everything it says out loud: patrolling, securing merchants, raiding rank 4 monsters. Complete nonsense. And what is this mission where you had to help the cafe? Arisha raised her head and turned to her sister, saying that there was a need to wear a uniform and distribute leaflets. Yunia asked if her friend had done it. Arisha blushed deeply and shouted that she just thought they had a very cute uniform. Yunia silently looked at her sister, as if losing hope in her, and then puffed on her pipe, which can be seen from the smoke, said that her sister is very pathetic. Arisha was heartbroken by these words, and just stared at the floor as she listened to her sister say that to think that Arisha would use the defense attorney certificate she received from her family to run such errands. Yunia asked that Arisha wanted to disgrace her family's name. Arisha recalls that all the knights looked at her like a goddess, with stars in their eyes. And Yunia continued to finish her off, saying that in those tasks, she only had to face low-level monsters. Arisha apparently wanted to act like a hero while performing low-level monster raids. Arisha began to ponder over her words, and sweat was pouring down her face. She knew she couldn't escape from herself. She remembered the gray-haired old man with the glowing eyes. She tilted her head very hard and clenched her fists in resentment. We head back to the forest in a small wooden cart. The elite squad stands behind their leader and says that her little sister looked completely normal, and she even seems to have recovered a little. Yunia asked about Korin, if anyone knew about him. They remembered the guy who was standing there, swinging his spear and looking at Arisha. At the same time, they said that this is a knight of the 5th rank. Yunia lit her pipe, looking into the distance, and asked why the Merkaba Academy's first test was so unreliable. After all, she watched him as he deftly dealt with monsters, twirling a spear over his head. Korin looked at Arisha from beginning to end, and he paid no more than 20% of his attention to the monsters. Yunia understood that it wasn't just experience or practice. She saw the sensitivity and obsession that can only be achieved by seriously improving your skills. She looked into the distance with a spark in her eyes, because she understood that at first glance, his style seems quite simple, but if you reach the height of Arden's style, you can understand that he has the ultimate stage of spear wielding. Korin's shadow stood with a spear. Yunia smiled as she put the phone to her lips, glad that even though their meeting was short, she was happy with Arisha's new friend, because if this guy was around her sister, then she can see him. Yunia stood under the moonlight with her arms crossed. We see a lot of delicious food, and this happens every time Marietta comes. It brings a lot of things with it. Marietta says there's a potato pie in there, and she added sliced lamb and baked it. Korin bowed, and Marietta was a little embarrassed, but she said that the mutton was fresh, it only arrived today. And Professor Josephine asked me to help her kill the animals, so Marietta practiced. Kareem, taking a bite of the pie, was touched by its taste, and blushed with tears in his eyes, thinking that Marietta was living the sad life of a vampire, eating only ice-cold meat, but she made it anyway. He really liked the pie. He touched it to the core of his soul. Marietta laughed and said, "Is it good? Next time, I'll bring beef. Do you like oxtail?" When all of a sudden Kareem took her hands and looked at her intently, as if he had fallen in love, saying that he adored him. Marietta was startled and asked what he was talking about. And then she got really red and hot, so she said she would bring him back next time. And then she added that his hands were so big, they were stiff and covered in scars. She thinks that he worked very hard. For her it's very cool and adult. When suddenly she jumped up and was very scared because she was called out. Marietta ran towards Isabella, waving her arms. Isabel asked her what she'd just been doing. Marietta started yelling that she hadn't done anything. Corin sat eating and poked his cheek with a finger. Marietta said goodbye to him, and he reflected that he didn't know much about girls her age, because in his previous life, he had never dated anyone because of Puck. Corinne thinks he would have had a chance if it hadn't been for Puck. There was a lot of delicious food left on the table, and he wondered if he could eat it all. We are shown a slightly cloudy sky, and the hero reflects that his current platonic relationship is quite different from his previous life. Yule sits across from Corin and eats rare and expensive mushrooms that she brings from the forest. And then they learn the Ogam alphabet in the library. Corinne then sits with Doron on the Mountain of Wolves and realizes that Doron often comes for him, too, because he finds him quite a useful colleague. When there are difficult missions where you can earn extra money, Doron asks you to join him. But Jaeger and Lark are standing open-mouthed in surprise, and the hero understood that he usually spends his time with them because they have common lectures and couples. Corinne is standing there with a scowl on her face, showing her fangs, and he asked that the monsters appeared. H. Warren came to him. She stands and says that he promised to buy her food. Corin was a little flustered, and H. Warren just stood there looking at him. Corin remembered that when he was hanging upside down in front of her, he promised to buy food. It's been a whole month since then, and he's surprised she can remember that. Jaeger and Lark started to run away from each other, and Corin turned to look at them shyly and told them that he wouldn't be able to hang out with them today. They started saying that they didn't do their homework just yet. He and H. Waring went to a local fish joint, and Corin said she looked like a cat, so he brought her there. While H. Waring was just throwing a whole fish in her mouth, Corin started yelling that she was crazy, or she could swallow the whole fish. But then she changed her mind and gave the fish to Corin, and after that, she watched very intently as he butchered the fish. He said that it was disrespectful to the food, but H. Waring replied that wasn't it just something to worry about and swallow. Corinne smiles and hands her the butchered fish on a bowl of rice, and asks that the fish looks much more appetizing now, and instead of just eating her portion, she should look at it and smell it. H. Waring was a little embarrassed and happy about it, and then said that it was respect. Corinne watched her eat the fish in love and told her to take her time. But then his gaze was contemptible, and he looked off into the distance, because he knew that the production of weapons was almost complete. It was still a little early, but the second part would start soon. We are transported to the Merkaba building, where the introduction of the second part began. Jaeger is shouting, and there are drops of water all around him. He is shouting because he did not study at all. These were midterm exams. Jaeger was holding a bowl of water, and Lark hugged the books and asked what was the point of regretting it 10 minutes before the exam started. And Lark had warned the Jaegers about it. At the same time, Jaeger replied that he should have been scolded, and Lark replied that he should have been listened to. Corin sat with a big smile on his face and black eyes, because his friends asked if he had ever learned anything, but Corin said that he didn't need to. He smiled as he looked up, thinking that they were different, because this wasn't the first time he was going to take this exam, so they just had to wait. The three of them were sitting on a chair, and the teacher behind the counter said that the test was starting. Corin picked up the paper with a smile, and then the camera moved away a little, and he sat reading the assignment. If the inertia of motion x is denoted as y, then what value of y should be applied to 85c? Immediately after reading this assignment, he turned white and realized that he was just finished. After a while, Jaeger stretches and says it's finally over, and Lark says he knew he was going to make it, and then he asks how Corin is doing. Corin bowed his head and lowered his hands with the paper. It went white again. And then he said that knights only need to be able to write their own names. Lark shouted that he hadn't even written the answers at all. And Jaeger added that even he did a couple of tasks before falling asleep. Corin was defeated and teared up because he had forgotten that he had never studied in his previous life, but only continued to study expert skills. But he had no knowledge of this world. But then he squeezed the paper in anger and thought that this was just a written exam. He could still improve. Suddenly, we are transported to the festival discussion hall, where someone is shouting for the first year to gain strength. Corin stood with his spear in the midst of a crowd of other knights and reflected that the peak of the midterms, one of the easiest events in the game, the faculty exam, was the perfect opportunity to improve his grades that had dropped during the test. Corin was standing there looking a little upset, his lips showing it. But he understood that these exams were conducted by a professor of the swordsman faculty, or one of the temporarily invited instructors. Therefore, there are 15 students from the team who need to show what they are capable and get a score for it. So Kareem started to smile wickedly, and his eyes glowed a little. After all, since he was officially a 5th ranked knight, he wouldn't be given a strong instructor. He will be able to get extra points if he wins over the instructor. Kareem thinks, I do not know where we will be, but I feel sorry for you in advance. Whoever it is, I'll win it and make up for failing the written exam. All the knights were shocked to see someone, which was what interested Corin, so he crossed his arms and started to look at who had come. Then suddenly he was called out, and it was Lunia, her hair flying in the wind. Corinne was getting very worried and didn't understand what she was doing there. It was a huge battle arena, and there were many students who had started the quest. Throughout the arena, a voice is heard announcing that the special guests for the challenge will be the elite of the famous swordsman family, Arden. These will be the 5 swords of the first pavilion. All 5 girls were standing in various poses, asking each other if they would feel sorry for them. One of them remarked that everyone should be careful with the magician who controls swords, because he is quite dangerous. All the knights charged at them, and Doron stood and watched, thinking that they were all 2nd ranked, just like him, just like Arisha. The girls also started walking towards them, and suddenly they all started waving their swords, which caused a huge flash of fire in front of them. Large boulders flew out of the ground, knocking down the knights, most of them already flying in the air, while Doron stood and continued to think that the chances of their victory were not high. Against a large number of opponents, and even more so the girls first of all disturbed their visibility, because they have experience in such things, and he more important than any rank. Doron started twirling his swords in the air, and decided to make them visible. When Milia's ghostly sword suddenly appeared right above Doron, he noticed her and immediately stopped her with his big sword, thinking that they probably wanted to catch them off guard. Arisha sees this and shouts at Doron, but she is attacked by one of the 5 swords, telling her not to be distracted. Arisha was able to block her attack, but with great difficulty. Jenny, the swift sword, said that Arisha's current opponent is her. But then Jenny hits Arisha's leg and says that there are about 15 students, but 5 of them should be enough. Arisha started to fall due to a kick on her leg, and Jenny said that her posture was weak. And then I immediately thrust my sword at Arisha's face, but she dodged the attack. Everyone watching started shouting that this was the only thing to expect from the 5 swords of Arden. All 5 girls were fighting with students. The students shouted that they were too strong and fast. Arisha and Doron are standing next to each other, still on their feet, and everyone in the audience is shouting that everyone is dead except these 2. Doron used his hand to point out the direction of the swords, and told the fire sword spirit and the iron one to attack. Doron's experience allowed him to fight back against the 5 swords of Arden. Melina stood and fought off Doron's swords, but it seems that Doron will come out victorious in a little more time. Arisha continued to fight with Jenny, blocking her punches. She was sitting down, and Jenny was standing in a crouch, attacking her, saying that Arisha didn't have enough practice, and asked that she wanted to be the heir of the Sword Emperor with such skills. Jenny approached Arisha's face, and Arisha still blocked Jenny's attacks. And then Swift Sword said that if she wants to become the heir of the Sword Emperor, then with such skills, she can't even bother with finishing her training. She should just drop out and finish her training at home. Arisha got angry at these words, and pushed her away, bright sparks from the swords appearing around her. Arisha Arden shouted that she would never allow this to happen. Arisha's eyes were glowing white, and she opened her vigilant gaze to look around. But for now, she can't look at the area directly. So Jenny threw a punch at Arisha, which made her go down on her knees and lose. Swift Sword said that you should always stay focused until the very end. Then she put the katana on her shoulder, exhaled, and said that she still had a lot to learn. But Lunia was standing in front of Group B, becoming their examiner. In Group B were Jaeger, Lark, Yule, and Corin. Lunia took up a stance and had a purple aura around her, so she said that they should start and let everyone treat it like practicing with a great high-ranked warrior. Corinne and the others stood and listened to this, wondering at her words. Maria and H. Waring were in a red light and red aura. Their eyes were shining brightly. And the story goes that a great special ranked warrior is a monster that can destroy an entire army, and a disaster that even dozens of guardians can't handle. Corinne was starting to stare at her, and he was a little worried. After all, he knew that most guardians would never meet such a monster in their entire lives, and even if someone told such a story, they would hardly believe him. Lunia was very serious because there was a bright light in her eyes, and with her lightning speed, she began to cut everything around her, leaving sword marks. Lunia is able to compete with a great high-ranked warrior. She is a monster among monsters. From her sword strikes, the entire arena began to crumble into pieces, and because of this, all the warriors started flying everywhere, shouting for help. And Corin hid behind a rock and marveled at its power. Next to him was Jaeger, who had a look of fear on his face. He shouted that he almost died, and that Lunia was overreacting, why she was seriously fighting with students. Corinne told him that she was holding back, because if she didn't hold back, it would all be over in 10 seconds. Corin pointed at it, and Jaeger picked Lark up, because he thought Lark would die there if he didn't take him with him. Corin replied that he thought Lark was already dead. When suddenly another boulder flies into the stone behind which the Jaeger was hiding, and throws the Jaegers and Lark far away. Corin heard Lunia's words and turned his head in her direction. Lunia stood behind the stone and waited for Corin to come out, saying that he was too weak to get her custody, and added that he should come out since it was just the two of them. Corin came out from behind the rock with his hands raised, asking if he could surrender. Lunia said that only if he wants to get the lowest score, but it is unlikely to suit him. Lunia looked down at Corin with glowing eyes and said in an intimidating voice that he would hardly miss such a rare opportunity to fight an outstanding soldier. Corin was sweating on the back of his neck, and he smiled a little as he wondered if she could tell from a kilometer away that she was Lunia Arden. Corin and Lunia stand with their backs to each other, because in their previous lives, he and Lunia were comrades who fought side by side many times. Lunia taught Corin how to fight with a spear on a dummy, and he doesn't think it's any embellishment if he says that it was she who taught him the real fighting skills. So by the end of the last round, he was no match for her. Corin took the spear in his hands, and it was clear that he was very serious and was going to fight her, because Lunia was a wall for him, which he had to break through sooner or later, and if he wanted to take the place of a player, then in the end he had to surpass her. Lunia saw him and immediately launched an attack. It was so fast that she was already close to Corin. She landed the first punch, which Corin successfully blocked. Then they would instantly jump around the arena, punching and punching each other. Corin took the time to attack Lunia, but she dodged, and then immediately struck out with the back of her katana. Corin was able to block the blow. Bright sparks were emitted from his spear, and Lunia struck out one after another. Corin had sweat on his face and looked very furious. Everyone watching was wondering who this guy was. After all, he was rank 5. How he could stand up to Lunia Arden, how this was even possible. Corin shouted out of exhaustion, and then stood leaning on his spear, exhausted from the fight. Lunia stood in front of him and said that it was such a pity that he was exhausted. Lunia holstered her sword, and Corin thought that if she put it away, it meant that she thought he'd done a good job. But then he thought better of it, and began to stare intently at her movements, because this can't be happening. Lunia bent down. She was all shining with a bright blue light, and it was a territory slash, the strongest technique of the mighty Emperor, Garen's sword. Lunia said that she would see how he handled it. He had to show her a decent answer. She intended to kill him. There were strong gusts of wind around Lunia, which could be seen from the black waves. Everyone watching was horrified. They all sat open-mouthed, because they understood that she was doing a very dangerous thing right now. The teachers who were watching this started to get up from their seats and point at her. They were all very surprised and started shouting that she was going to kill a student, so we need to stop the exam right now. One of the teachers starts running there, but freezes, because Corin used the ability of one cut, an imaginary cut of the territory. His eye split in two. The entire world holds its breath, but the translucent reflection of Lunia Arden moves through the static world. It feels like her sword is moving in slow motion. Corin swung his spear in her direction, and he knew that he was running at full speed with the spear towards Lunia's sword, and he could see it clearly. His spear started to shake, and he realized that his spear wasn't moving at all. Corin, too, began to tremble as he tried to move in the still world. He can only look at how much things have slowed down. He remembered dodging the wolf's punch and realized that it was just a coincidence with Mariette. He believes that he is still unable to control the territory. But then his eye begins to sparkle. He found a second wind and realized that you need to take just one step, even if it will not be perfect, but you need to do it. His spear was slightly taller than Lunia's sword, and he was able to take this step by touching the spear to the sword. So it resonated, creating waves. Lunia's eyes widened in surprise, and immediately after, there was a huge explosion around the two of them. All the teachers were open-mouthed, because they didn't understand that it was an instinct, maybe an understanding, or an awareness of omnipotence, as if he was the center of the universe. Lunia stood on top of him, pointing her katana directly at him, and was very pleased to see that he was able to react to her territory. Corin was standing in front of her, holding a spear in his hands, and he was covered in bruises from the fight. Lunia started to walk away from him, and Corin looked down at his spear, and it was split in half. Lunia said that would be the end of it, and added that Corin needed to find a better weapon. This spear in his hands right now is not suitable for his strength. Suddenly, Lunia noticed something. It was Arisha, who was sitting there with her eyes spellbound, and her aura was shining. As Lunia left, her back to Corin, she heard him say that the test was not so important, because she had accepted the challenge to show the territory. Corin was drenched in sweat from the fight, and looked at her hopefully, saying that she also knew very well about Arisha's talent. He knew that even though he had lost the fights, he had achieved his goal. Lunia tilted her head slightly and said that she would stay in the city for a while as she had some business to attend to, but she said that he wasn't being conceited and didn't interfere. No matter how hard he tries, nothing will change. Then, as she continued to walk away from Korin, she added that she would crush Arisha with her own hands. Korin smiled wickedly as he watched her go, and realized that after showing her his territory, he was confident that everything would go her way. A shout can be heard from the destroyed arena that Korin Losh, according to the results of an anonymous decision of the instructors, receives the highest score and the maximum number of additional points for a practical task. Everyone sitting on the podium hears this and is surprised because he fought alone. The teachers are still surprised by his strength, so they are very excited about him because he could just hold out against Lunia Arden. They are surprised that this is the 5th rank. The old man crossed his arms in front of his face, wondering if it was Korin Losh who was trying to catch the spirits. Permak was also completely shocked that he had already taken off his glasses, and beamed with surprise that he was able to use his technique. A few days later, Korin went to the blacksmith shop, because even before Lunia's words, he felt that he needed to upgrade his weapon. Korin stood with a calm smile while the blacksmith wiped his face with a towel and asked who he was, why the academy didn't hesitate to give out such precious and rare material, and how he knew his family's secret techniques. Korin told him not to think about it, because he had a lot of experience in his previous life, and now he didn't want to explain anything at all. Korin unwrapped a blue crystal from a cloth and said that such an ingredient would cost at least several hundred gold, and no player wanted to spend that amount. Usually, such items are created with the help of things collected during the passage of the storyline or quest. But it has a special soul pollen, a rune stone of the 2nd rank, a silver stone of the 1st rank. He also remembered how the chairman bowed before him. Korin was very happy to see what he had created. After all, it was one of the best weapons for using the territory. He created a legendary spear from a silver knight from the Shadow Kingdom. It was known as the Silver Spear. We see little Arisha, who is scared to the bone, and hears screams that the blood does not stop, although the wound was not fatal, so why? Little Arisha was standing with a katana in her hands, and there were piles of monster corpses in front of her, and she remembers the first time she was in real combat. She would never forget how she had pierced through a rank 5 monster and watched the blood and entrails come out of their body. But then she remembers how she killed some girl, and realizes that the smell of people's blood is different. This was her first time killing someone, but she immediately understood. Arisha stood trembling with fear, and her katana was covered in blood. She stared at her reflection in the katana, tears streaming down her face, shivering and covered in blood, and the pungent smell that accompanied the death throes of her dying life. Back in the present, she looks at her reflection through her katana again. And then she's riding on a small train, on the edge of the forest, looking at the views. And she thinks that today she will have to work again. Her mission is to capture werewolves, for which she will receive 70 silver coins. But it's much better than that mission. When suddenly she has an urgent task, and behind this notification you can see a huge entity with glowing red eyes. Arisha waves her hands and shouts that she doesn't like danger. Arisha sits in the carriage and looks at the handkerchief and is a little embarrassed because there was a reason why she chose a task related to werewolves. She remembers how once she was saved by some guy and she wants to find him. Suddenly, she hears discontented voices and turns to look. There is Korin, walking through a crowd of kids who were complaining that Korin, a 5th ranked knight, should just do the work of a longshoreman. But he just walked over to Arisha and said hello. Arisha returned the greeting. All the other guards looked down on them, because of the quota system, the guards have to put up with students on a mission. But he took Arisha's hands in his, and everything around him began to glow with kindness. And it was a great relief to him that Arisha was with him on a mission. Korin knew that these guards were looking directly at the back of his head, but they couldn't tell him anything directly in front of the Sword Emperor's granddaughter. Korin put his arm around Arisha and quietly asked her what was wrong with her eyes. Arisha didn't understand what they were talking about and said they were fine. But Korin insisted, saying that wasn't what he was talking about. Then he took his hand away and thought, and Arisha looked at him and asked him if his sister had said something about her. Korin said it was, but she didn't really tell him anything. Arisha started looking down and was very upset. Korin said that she needed to hurry, because her sister was pretty serious. She was going to break her so that she couldn't hold the sword in her hands. Korin was surprised by her words and turned to look at her. Arisha said that then she would just stop using weapons. Korin stared off into the distance and wondered if he might not even be able to stop her. We are transported to the forest, where our heroes arrived. The knights were able to put the main werewolf in a box, and the rest were simply killed. But suddenly the situation changed dramatically. The knights began to fight off an even larger crowd of werewolves, and shouted that there were a lot of them. They did not understand where they could come from. One of the knights, defending himself, shouted to the other who was hit. He asked where the 5th-ranked miner was, and they said they didn't know, and what difference did it make. But at that moment, Arisha just cut down each monster, but it wasn't long, because the blue spirits also came out to her. No one understood where they might come from, since there are no monsters, but also spirits should not be. Arisha suddenly noticed something, and she was already starting to get a little worried, because she knew that deserted places usually didn't attract evil spirits. And she has a feeling that this is the work of a man. When suddenly a man in armor and carrying an axe appeared behind her, she turned around and began to defend herself from his blows and felt that he was very strong. It was hardly a ghost, but rather a knight. Arisha struggled with it, not letting it attack, but also not killing it, as another monster came to her back. Arisha shouts to the knight not to fall and move away, otherwise she will cut him down. Suddenly, she noticed that another man had come up behind her. But it was too late for her to notice, so he was able to hit her on the back and send her flying. And then another knight swung at her, trying to kill her. Arisha was scared, so she sat there with her mouth open, her eyes blank. But immediately, she decided not to give up and cut the knight before he could attack. Blood flew everywhere. A man fell in front of Arisha, cut in half. Arisha killed a man again, and saw the blood on the ground, and also smelled human blood, the same piercing smell of the dying agony of dying life. She was shocked again, and almost tearful as she realized that she had killed a man again. While she was busy thinking, the second knight jumped on her. But his head was pierced through, and it was Corin who looked coldly at this knight, and asked why she was frozen, because these are not people. Arisha asked what they meant by not being human. Corin held this knight's head and said that they were just corpses that were resurrected by dark magic. The head he was holding in his hands was all dirty, and there were no eyes at all. This was the main event of the beginning of the second part, the suppression of the deadly vampire from Misty City. Corin turned around and saw something that made his eyes sparkle. It is narrated that if you go on a mission to catch werewolves, then during its passage, you can meet the deadly John Doe, and after the battle you can fight him off. Arisha was standing there shouting at Corin, but the two dead knights appeared again behind her. Suddenly, a red-robed figure appeared in the sky, and one of its eyes shone. Corin pushed Arisha away, telling her to prepare to run away. Corin started to prepare something while standing right under this flying monster, and his hand started to glow when suddenly he threw a spear that pierced right through the monster and nailed it to a tree. Everyone stood and stared at the hanging monster and was shocked by Corin's strength, and one of the knights suggested that since the monster had died from a single blow, it must have been very weak. Corin was suspicious, his eyes were red, and he was thinking that if he had died right now, he wouldn't have become the boss of the initial arc. Corin knew that based on his stats, he wouldn't be able to catch him alone. The monster's eyes shone with a bright red light and started shouting, "Impressive. You destroyed my doll. Then we'll be done for today. I look forward to our next meeting." Corin knew that the problem wasn't his strength, but his stealth. As a bloody mist suddenly began to ooze out of the body, everyone standing below started shouting about the fog. Corin was looking at this, and it was obvious that he was clearly unhappy with what was happening. After all, it was the scarlet mist that appears when an undead mage's health reaches 0. And now he has destroyed the device that creates smoke. Mist was also oozing out of that mage's skull, and the undead are just using the mage's body. The spear was still inside the monster, and because of this mist, it was hard to find undead, and hard to catch them, as it had completely merged with the mist. They all started running, and Corin shouted that this fog looked very dangerous. Everyone noticed that the spear was there, and shouted that he had forgotten it, but it was expensive. Suddenly, the spear began to sparkle, and a rune of return appeared above it. Suddenly, a spear from the monster began to fly directly into Corin's hand. He caught it and began to run further. He said he could summon it back. Suddenly, Arisha and Corin turned around and heard shouts. Some kid tripped and was lying on the ground, saying he tripped on a tree root. Arisha and Corin rushed to his aid, not about to abandon their ally. Arisha held out her hand to him, and he stood open-mouthed and shouted at her to watch out. Suddenly, a hand flew after Arisha, which she did not expect. Immediately, that hand grabbed her, carrying her far away. Corin looked at this and thought that it really annoyed him. He went over to the guy named Charlie, took him by the shoulder, and started yelling at him to leave, forgetting about the forest and them. Then Corin asked him for his cloak. Taking the cloak, he ran after Arisha with the spear. Corin was very angry that he was baring his teeth. After all, he knew that he could hardly repeat it a second time. In his previous life, he was trapped in the fog and was in critical condition after only 1 minute. He shielded his hands from the fog, and he knew that he had the ability to recover now, so he would be able to hold on for longer. Right now, only Arisha is important. She slashed at all the hands that were flying towards her, yelling at them to get their hands away. But it didn't help her, and all the blood was just being sucked out of her body, so it wouldn't last long. But Orisha didn't give up and chopped those hands, thinking that she only needed to chop and chop. But they all didn't cut in any way. And now her mouth was already bleeding, and her hand with the katana began to tremble, and she began to believe that her strength was already over. Her grip was very loose, so she remembered the words of her sister who was standing over her and asked why she was in such a state. The katana in her hands just fell to the ground, and Orisha looked empty, no fire in her eyes. She thought she was just weak. The blood continued to drain out of her and her ponytail began to develop in the wind of blood. She started apologizing because she wanted to be cool and also save someone. And she remembered how someone had saved her by holding a blindfold over her eyes. Orisha wanted to win his respect because he had saved her life. Suddenly, she looked up as she heard a scream, and she saw the silhouette of a man in a cloak with a spear. But her eyes brightened again as she recognized the voice. All she could see was Korin's dark silhouette, but then he started to turn around. Korin leapt toward Orisha, covered in blood, his eyes bright orange, and shouting Orisha's name. Korin walked over to Orisha, who was being grabbed by red hands. He hoped she was safe. The girl recognized him. She can't move. Orisha was covered in blood. She asked the hero to save her. She felt like she was going to die at this rate. Korin put his cape on Orisha and asked her to calm down. It won't work if she hits blindly. The hero put a sword in the girl's hands and asked her to focus and make a deep cut. To do this, she just needed to calm down. Orisha didn't understand, but Korin had promised to protect her from the undead. The dead were walking towards them, wearing capes with crosses on them. Korin asked Orisha if she knew what she needed to do next. The girl replied that she couldn't. She has little energy and is dizzy. She's in pain because of the fog. The hero put his hands on the shoulders of the crying girl and said that she could handle it. He buried his forehead in hers and kept talking. Compared to the swordsman she knows, Orisha's talent is outstanding. She can handle it if she wants to. You only need to take one step. Korin looked at her and smiled. He'd told her that one step was enough. Tears welled up in the girl's eyes. Korin rushed towards the undead and shouted thanks to the girl in advance. Orisha just stood there thinking, blood streaming from her hands and head. She can't last long in there, and Korin's aura rank is lower than hers, because he's going to survive. The girl gritted her teeth. If the hero says so, then she has no choice. Orisha started to draw her sword from her belt. The girl reached for her sword, and red hands flew at her. She is going to use her grandfather's secret technique, which is able to cut everything. But to do this, she needs to wake up. Watchful eyes. The girl was already standing on the water, a cursed ability that allows you to see other territories with the power. Orisha drew her weapon with her eyes closed. She remembered Korin's words and lifted her foot. One step would be enough, she thought again. Orisha quickly put her foot down on the water, which was rippling with waves. Orisha's eyes glittered blue, and the sword was blinding with its radiance. This was the Arden style, the first Arden sword technique. With a single blow, she cut down 3 opponents. Orisha even broke trees with one blow. The girl used an area-breaking technique. She cut down a few more monsters in front of Korin. The monster that was cut in half didn't understand how the girl saw it. His head was on the ground. It was light outside, and all the trees had been cut down. Red mud was flying away from the flash of purple light. Orisha was standing next to the defeated monster, and Korin and the guards were looking at her. The fog lifted. They asked the girl what had just happened. She said it was the deadly John Doe, the vampire from Misty City. The guards and Korin were incredibly surprised because the entire forest was chopped in half. One of the guards had heard of such a move. This is the legendary Sword Emperor Realm Gap. After these words, Korin was shocked. He thought Orisha would show the third form or Iron Wave. He can't figure out why a girl can do this technique right now. The girl smiled and shouted to the hero that she had succeeded. She did it. The hero didn't believe it. He didn't think it should have happened. Korin still stared in surprise at the 2 guards, who were glad of this. It turns out that Orisha will be the next head of the Arden family. After all, no one other than the Sword Emperor can use such a skill, with the exception of this lady. Everyone cheered and shouted that Orisha would be the future of the Arden family, the next Sword Emperor. But not Korin. He was in complete shock. The hero had a very strange expression on his face. Why everything always goes wrong. We are shown a lot of newspapers where it is written that Orisha is a true genius. One of the girls in the elite squad tore up the newspaper. She thought it was cheeky. The 4 of them were standing in front of the girl in a chair. The one who tore up the newspaper asked to get rid of it. Luina Arden was sitting on a chair, drinking tea. The main man of the Arden family stood with his back to his heirs. The illustrious Arden family of swordsmen operates within the sword faction and makes decisions based on the order of power. But despite Garen Arden's overwhelming charisma, many wondered who would take his place. Blue flames radiated from it. The realm gap is at the heart path stage, and most warriors don't know this realm. Garand Arden had been waiting a long time for someone to continue his work. Luina Arden and the other family members were tired from training. She practiced by shedding blood and sweat. The calluses on her hands are proof of the path she followed. But even Luina, who was called the genius of her generation, couldn't please the emperor. However, during the battle with her younger sister who was crying, Luina didn't think that her younger sister, the illegitimate child of the head of the family, who only picked up a sword and engaged in a friendly battle with her, could become her rival. Luina glared at her sister during the battle at an early age. She attacked Arisha, but the younger sister only tried to defend herself. During the battle, Arisha's eyes were seeded. Her older sister's expression changed, and she was surprised by this. Blood splattered through the air. The blood didn't stop. The wound was not fatal. Luina was lying on the floor, and Arisha was looking at her sister in fear. Luina's eyes wouldn't close, and there were drops of blood on the floor. She couldn't see it. Arisha was in a crouch, and there were traces of blood on her right shoulder. By the time she was ready, Luina was already injured. And it wasn't about speed. It was something else. They were in some sort of white room. Arisha looked at her sister, who was bleeding profusely. It was in the region. Arisha has taken a step on this supreme path of martial art. But how is this possible? Luina, who was lying on the floor, was unbearably angry. Luina looked at her sister with disdain. Her younger sister is shallow and lazy. She's definitely in shock. Arisha was standing next to Luina. In her hands is a sword that was covered in blood. But now the older sister understood what kind of title her grandfather was talking about. Arisha grudgingly smiled and cried. Its intricate nature is not understood by ordinary mortals. The sword demon, a demon's talent. Garen came up behind Arisha and put his hand on her head. He also appoints Arisha as the main candidate. So the younger sister overcame the objections of the others and became the main candidate. The memory of Luina stroking the head of her sister, who was reproached by her father's family, remained only there. The older sister was drinking tea. She looked away as someone called her name. Girls in suits were standing in front of her. She was worried about Luin. She got up from her chair and asked no one to worry. After all, she also wanted Arisha to enter the domain. She relished the memory of Arisha's blue glow. After all, if Luina sees her sister's sword again, she can also reach the area. The older sister went off somewhere, followed by the other girls. She told everyone to prepare for a sword fight. They show us a green building. In this building, Arisha was lying on a bed, and Korin was standing next to her. He was interested in her health and thoughts about whether the girl will be able to recover. She replied that she had been told that she would recover from potions in a day or two. Arisha offered Korin a honey candy, but he was more interested in something else. He raised his hand to his face and asked how Arisha was able to apply the area break. After all, just because she can see an area doesn't mean she can use it. The girl was embarrassed and replied that he believed in her, and it turned out that she really could. The hero was angry, but Arisha was cheerful. She really is a genius who doesn't need any effort. Someone knocked on the door. In less than a second, Maria Dunnerf opened the door. She came to check on Arisha. Karine and Maria were standing next to Arisha. They got to know each other. The hero pointed to Arisha and asked Maria if she had come to see her. The sophomore said yes. Korin put his hand to Arisha's face and told her that they were worried about her. The freshman was happy about it. Suddenly, Maria's face became scary. She decided to ask Korin if he and Arisha were close by any chance. But their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the window, which they noticed. The heavenly Yaksha, H. Warren, descended from above. Karine was startled. Karine and Maria were standing next to each other, and they were both tense. The hero thought that Marietta was uncomfortable around H. Warren, although such an appearance would frighten anyone. Maria turned to face Korin, clenched her fists, and asked Korin a question. She asked if the hero had lunch with H. Warren. Karine didn't understand, but he assumed that was what made Maria tense up. The hero asked the sophomore not to worry. He will also cook a wonderful dish with her. They both looked at each other and smiled. However, Korin raised a hand to his chin and considered. All the stars of the academy suddenly gathered here, and together with them, without having time to think about it, he immediately said a couple of phrases to Arisha. Since there were rumors that she had succeeded in breaking the realm, Luina would soon come and challenge her to a duel. Arisha was so scared that she flinched. She didn't understand what kind of duel it was. A sword fight. A swordsman's tradition that was kept alive by 5 master swordsmen. It was used to test the pavilion masters who became the head of the family's faction, and this was only the introductory part. They show us the Arden family sign. But it's been a long time since this duel was used as a way to get rid of an opponent. Arisha burst into tears. She is sure that if she fights Luina, she will die. She can't even beat 5 swords. But Korin said that he has a good idea and can tell us, but he has one condition. Arisha's eyes almost fell out. She will do anything to make the hero tell her everything. He looked at her confidently and spoke. From now on, if he suggested a monster fight or training session, Arisha would have to do it without complaining. In fact, she will be a permanent member of the squad. Hwarang and Maria stood there in confusion. Arisha had shouted that she would swear fealty if only Corin would help. The hero replied that he would assume that Arisha had sworn an oath. He, Locke, had gone through the long hardships of their time with the truth that he had learned inside his body. Before the hero could finish speaking, we already see one of the girls who were next to Nguyen. She walked through the city at night. A knife flew into the wall in front of her. The girl was scared. Someone was walking towards her, but only her shoes with the cross on them were visible. This man challenges the girl. She had already started to draw her weapon from behind her back. The girl recognized the man who had thrown the dagger at her. It was student Hwarang. With one hand, she shielded her eyes from the light, and with the other, she held a knife and spoke. She is a master of the knife style from Arisha's studio. Hwarang lashed out at her opponent, but she didn't understand why the student was doing this so suddenly. Sky Yaksha's face was calm. Hwarang replied that Corin would buy her sushi if she could catch an ardent girl. Then we are transported to the battle between Corin and another girl from the family. All she did was fend off the hero's punches. She didn't understand what the student was doing or what it all meant. A blue glow appeared around Corin's spear. He applied the technique of Arisha's studio, the style of Guandao master Corin Locke. His eyes were burning red, and his face was furious. He asks to learn from the excellent master of the wave of the sword Lena. It's either you or you. This is the truth of life. Dodds Arishi's dojo, the style of the Guandao master, Corin Locke. He was grinning wildly, and his eyes were glowing orange. Dodds Arishi's dojo, the style of a knife master, Hwarang. The girl was standing in a rack, with 3 knives in her left hand. Dodds Arishi's dojo, the flying sword master style, Doron Varsky. 3 swords of different colors were flying from behind him. Dojo Arishi, the style of Master Gandalf. Maria Dunnerf. Startled, she held a staff that gave off a pink glow. The new head of the Arishi Dojo Masters, Arisha Arden herself. She was standing in her unique stance, holding a katana over her head. First Arden Sword Pavilion, 5 swords, defeated. A girl from the 5 sword squad was on one knee, asking Corin why they were doing this. He smiled maliciously and answered, to grow your own dojo. They need to work on their fame, and they plan to expand their sphere of influence quite aggressively. It was written in all the newspapers that the new style Donzioff Arden Dojo is won by 5 swords. The main member of the Arden family was standing in front of his students. There is a sword fight in the family rules. This is a test that selects pavilion masters to manage important family matters. But even he knows that this is a way to destroy his opponents. So Corin, his eyes purple with the desire to carry out his idea, said that he would change these foundations. All the girls of the squad were defeated, and Arisha fought. And the hero will make a dojo duel out of them dots, where you will need to defeat 5 swords in a 1-on-1 battle in a new duel format. In the end, they want to achieve a 1-on-1 fight against Sister Arisha. The 2 sisters were standing next to their friends and talking. Arisha looked at her sister and thought, if she wins and talks about it, her army won't be able to touch her again. That's why she started this whole thing. The fee for registering a martial arts dojo, the fee for buying an abandoned combat dojo, the fee for hiring a drone mercenary, and so on. All this was done by Maria, who was sitting on gold bars, and she liked it all. Arisha hoped that as soon as she received the reward for the quest with John Doe, she would quickly pay the full amount. Yuna walked towards Arisha and said one word, interesting. She glared at her younger sister and spoke. If Arisha wanted to run away, she should have run away as soon as she saw Luna. It's clear to her that the duel with the dojo wasn't her idea. Arisha was scared because her sister is very perceptive. Arisha's eyes were streaming with tears, and he was standing behind her, asking her if she had anything to say. Yuna could tell from her younger sister's reaction that Corin Locke was definitely behind this. Arisha Arden stood looking at the floor. She wasn't sure if she could defeat the first master of the Sword Pavilion. The younger one called out to her sister. Yuna looked at Arisha and listened intently. New dojo master Ardenov offers her a friendly duel. Yuna closed her eyes and said, so be it. But she warned that she would not use training or non-lethal weapons. Arisha was excited, but said she was ready for it. They raised their katanas in front of them and prepared for battle. First Sword Style Arden, Grand Disciple Yuna Arden, and First Sword Style Arden, Second Rank Swordswoman Arisha Arden. It's time for this duel of 2 sisters. Maria watched intently and kept her hands locked, probably out of excitement. Even if she gains full power after transforming into a vampire, she still won't be able to defeat Luinia. Maria turned to Corin and asked if Arisha was ready. Corin stood quietly with his hands on each other and replied that he believed in Arisha. She can handle it. Maria smiled and agreed. If the hero says so, then she believes him. Notice that Korin Locke's maximum power of attorney to Marietta has not changed. Luna threw something at Korin and told him to take it. The hero caught a bag of gold and said that it would be too much to fix the dojo. Luna said no. She ran towards Arisha and said it was a renovation fee. The battle had begun. Luna attacked Arisha. Lightning struck the wall behind her younger sister. Corinne and Maria were terrified. We are shown flashbacks when two sisters were already fighting at an early age. It was clear from Arisha's face that it was very difficult for her then. But she admired Luinia. She was her idol when she still had a passion for swords. She remembered how her older sister had returned from a mission in the city, and all the residents were cheering. Miss Luina defeated the Minotaur, a rank 1 monster. An incredible result for a 15-year-old. They had heard that even Monsieur Guerin was following Madame Luina's progress. She looked like a hero from a fairy tale, like their grandfather Garand Arden, on whose stories Arisha grew up. But she was only the daughter of a concubine. Her mother had died in childbirth, and her father had seen her only as a shameful reminder of his mistake. All that mattered to him was the blood of the great sword emperor, Garand Arden. Memories of how two sisters met in the city. Luina put her hand on Arisha's head and said that she had grown up. But on the day Arisha first cut a man, everything went downhill. She cried when she saw it. Luina's sword began to glow with blue flames. The girl's gaze was focused on the sword that was rapidly approaching her. First, take a step back and parry the first blow, she thought. Arisha deflected her older sister's blow. This time, Arisha's sword shone with blue flames. She realized that Luina was following the instructions from the textbooks. And even though she's good at what she's been officially taught, she didn't expect an unconventional defense. Luina swung her sword again, but Arisha jumped back. The younger sister was sliding on the ground. Luina screamed at her that the younger girl's legs were as clumsy as ever. Arisha was angry and full of confidence. Use your speed, reduce your visibility, and hit from extremely close range. Arisha was moving so fast that only traces of dust were visible. The younger sister was already behind Luina, but she noticed it. It was an advanced attack, the third form, lightning. Luina turned her gaze in her sister's direction. She launched an attack with a vertical slash, Makawaza, but Arisha managed to get her head back. The younger sister clenched her teeth and shouted hey. To the older one, Arisha lashed out with her entire body, not her sword. But Luina dodged and knocked Arisha to the floor. A blue glow began to appear around the older sister, and her face was in shadow. She kicked the younger one in the face. Arisha thought that she could defeat her sister with such tricks. The younger one was lying on the floor, and Luina was already swinging her sword. But Arishu managed to block the attack. Arisha's eyes began to glow red. This time, she used Makawaza. Arisha's sword moved very fast. Just like Korin had said, Arisha started attacking her older sister with a combined punch. Arisha's face was visible in the reflection of Luina's sword. She noticed that her younger sister was good at counterattacking even against a move that was supposed to bring her to her knee. So it won't be so easy, but she still lacks experience. Luina kicked Arisha again. The younger sister was in a lot of pain and was holding her stomach with one hand. Luina continued to attack, but this time it was an air strike. Arisha managed to block the blow, and then she immediately counterattacked. Luina barely managed to dodge. Arisha once again attacked her older sister, but she managed to parry the blow. The younger one was shouting, and her eyes showed that she was confident in her attacks. She starts to keep up with Luina. In addition, a blue diamond can be seen in Arisha's eyes. She can see the area now. Luina was smiling. This was how she wanted her sister to be. She wanted to see the real Arisha that she was hiding despite her talent. The older sister started attacking again, while Arisha defended. The younger sister was panting and sitting on her lap. After a moment, she got to her feet and picked up her sword. Her entire face was covered in sweat. Luina looked at the girl and guessed that Arisha realized that victory was not 10 steps away from her. Victory is only 1 step away. Then the older sister will respond appropriately. There was a blue glow around Luina's entire body as she shouted for the younger one to attack. Arisha gave off the same glow, and she also had a smile on her face. The two sisters rushed to meet each other. Luina's face was angry as she recalled the moments with her sister. All this time, she was running after her. A picture of Arisha telling her older sister that one day she wanted to be a great swordswoman like her appeared in her mind. But now everything has changed. Corinne appeared behind Arisha. Luina was surprised by this. The two sisters' swords almost collided, but suddenly a star shone. Luina missed the gap in the area, while Arisha was already standing behind her. There was an explosion that Maria and Corinne were looking at. The main character was unperturbed, and Maria thought that everything was over. We saw the feet of one of the sisters who was standing. The other was on her knees, but the dust made it impossible to see who was who. However, the winner has already been determined.